Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of the Parente family. William Michael Parente was born on July 20, 1949, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. His parents, Willie and Rulon Parente, raised him with values rooted in their family's history of law enforcement. His father, a New York trooper, played a significant role in shaping his upbringing. As an only child, William received his parents' undivided attention. He spent summers enjoying the sun with his family in Long Beach. William pursued his education at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, thanks in part to the financial support of his uncle, Anthony J. Russo. William worked in his uncle's Manhattan law office on the Avenue of the Americas. There, he built a reputation as a thoughtful lawyer and dedication to his family. William was known for his demeanor, courteous which extended to everyone. He worked diligently for long hours, but made sure not to overwork himself. Unlike many of his peers, he refrained from using profanity or engaging in post-work gatherings for drinks. His disciplined lifestyle and commitment to kindness set him apart in the legal community. Even on difficult days, William maintained his composure and treated everyone with respect. In 1977, after being admitted to the New York bar, William married Betty Mazzarella. He began his career at a prestigious Wall Street law firm but made a significant change in 1988. When Betty became pregnant with their first child, William decided to start his own private practice. This change happened around the same time the family moved to Garden City, New York, an affluent community in Nassau County, Long Island. Despite living in the suburbs, the William family remained connected to their Brooklyn roots. They regularly returned to their old neighborhood to enjoy local delicacies, reconnect with old friends, visit their mother, and relive cherished childhood memories. By the time he was 60, William Parente had become an experienced estate and tax attorney. He ran his practice from an office in a Queens shopping center. His wife, Betty Mazzarella, 58, dedicated her time to taking care of their home and organizing charity fundraisers in their local community. Betty was actively involved in church activities, which were an integral part of their neighborhood's social fabric. The couple had two daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. Stephanie, the elder daughter, was 19 years old and a sophomore at Loyola College, studying speech pathology with plans to pursue dentistry in the future. Her friendly nature made her well-liked by her classmates and teachers. She also maintained close relationships with her friends back home in Garden City. Their younger daughter, Catherine, showed remarkable talent at just 11 years old, earning her admiration from teachers and staff at Garden City Middle School. Her exceptional abilities indicated a promising future ahead. In the later stages of his legal career, William became involved in what he called bridge loans. He acted as a financial intermediary, similar to a bank, allegedly using assets from investment portfolios under his management to finance these loans. When an investor asked for their money back, William Parente was unable to return the funds or explain why he couldn't. On April 15, 2009, William, along with his wife Betty and youngest daughter Catherine, took a trip to visit their eldest daughter Stephanie in Towson, planning to surprise her. They booked room 1029 at the Sharon Hotel, near the Talone Town Center Mall, with a reservation until the 19th. When they arrived, Stephanie's friend was surprised, given that classes had just resumed after the Easter break and Stephanie was busy preparing for a chemistry exam. The visit was unexpected, especially since the parents had already planned to visit on Friday the 17th to discuss Stephanie's study abroad plans in England. Despite the initial surprise, the visit seemed like a normal family reunion. However, what took place that day remains unclear. Based on the evidence, here is what happened. Betty Mazzarella Parente was the first victim. She was brutally assaulted and suffocated in bed on Sunday morning. Later, Catherine, the youngest daughter, met a similar fate, dying from the same violence as her mother. Catherine's body was placed beside her mother's. On Sunday afternoon, Stephanie arrived at the hotel after leaving her campus and tragically met the same demise as her mother and younger sister. Her body was laid beside theirs on the bed. None of the victims showed signs of struggle. No evidence of drugging or physical restraint was found. William Parente carefully planned the annihilation of his family. On that somber Sunday, around midnight, one of Stephanie's close friends and roommates grew worried about her absence from their dorm room. After hours of worrying, the roommate called the hotel room phone to reach Stephanie. The roommate knew Stephanie planned to return to the dorm to study for final exams, so they were surprised when William Parente, Stephanie's father, answered the call. William explained that Stephanie was staying at the hotel with family. The roommate accepted this excuse and ended the call, unaware that Stephanie was already dead. Later, the roommate thought back on the conversation and remembered that William's tone seemed unusual. On Monday morning, William Parente ended his life by using a knife he had bought at a nearby mall. He inflicted fatal injuries on himself in the hotel bathroom. When the family failed to check out, hotel staff became concerned. School Loyola College also raised concerns about Stephanie's unexplained absence from classes, especially since it was a crucial time for her final exams. The college contacted the hotel, requesting a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. At 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter their 10th floor room but found the door locked and received no response. The housekeeper alerted other staff, and a hotel manager entered the room. The manager found William Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom, having taken his own life with a knife. The manager quickly called emergency services and continued to investigate. As he entered the room further, he found 3 bodies carefully arranged on one of the beds. The victims were Betty Mazzarella and her 2 daughters, Stephanie and Catherine. The Baltimore County Police were immediately called to the scene, and all other guests on the 10th floor were relocated as part of the investigation. The police also took the family's Mercedes-Benz SUV from the hotel parking lot. After investigating, they determined that William Parente had committed a murder-suicide on that Sunday. And the police found that the causes of death were asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. They believe that Betty and Catherine were the first victims, followed by Stephanie. The police think that one of William's last interactions was with Stephanie's boyfriend, who tried to call Stephanie around midnight. However, Stephanie had already been killed by her father by then. Shortly after the call, William likely went to the bathroom and took his own life using a knife he had bought earlier from the mall. It is believed that William Parente's decision to kill his family and then commit suicide may have stemmed from an investigation into his possible involvement in a major fraud. William Parente was accused of being part of a Ponzi scheme, a type of investment scam where money from new investors is used to pay existing ones, often resulting in huge financial losses. Investors have been scammed of around $20 million, with one investor claiming a loss of $450,000. Investigations showed that William had issued bounced checks totaling $245,000 to investors, leading to further complaints to the New York Attorney General's office. After William Parente's death, some investors came forward with losses totaling millions of dollars. A colleague of William's made a poignant observation: financial losses can be recovered, but the loss of human life is irreparable. Friends and family have struggled to overcome their feelings of grief following the horrific incident. A memorial service was held at Loyola College on Monday night to honor Stephanie's memory. The family William Parente home, once full of life, became a somber space filled with tributes such as flowers and candlelit vigils. A funeral service was held at St. Joseph's Church in Garden City to commemorate Betty and her daughters. According to reports, Catherine's middle school classmates were transported by bus to attend the service. Stephanie's college peers made a significant effort to join, driving from Talon and arriving as early as 4 a.m. for the morning ceremony. The family was laid to rest together at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale, New York. In contrast, William Parente received a separate, private funeral service at a different location. He was cremated, but the location of his ashes was not publicly disclosed. The horrific actions of this merciless perpetrator have caused immense distress for the victims and their loved ones. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Abril Perez. Abril Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, northeastern Mexico, to parents Maria del Seguro Sagan and Manuel Perez. She was the second of 3 children. Abril demonstrated exceptional mathematical and entrepreneurial abilities from a young age. She was a dedicated reader and consistently ranked as the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril prioritized achieving financial independence, showcasing remarkable discipline and effective time management skills. Following high school, Abril attended the most prestigious university in New Leon, where she obtained a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her peers described her as intelligent, focused, and ambitious, while also being kind, cheerful, and always willing to assist others. After graduating, Abril secured a position in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. She later transitioned into digital sales, a rapidly expanding field, and discovered her true passion. Abril quickly rose through the ranks and became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was a young, beautiful, and successful woman who was rapidly achieving her life goals. She had built a stellar career, supported her family, and had big plans for the future. However, her personal life was still unfulfilled, which worried her loved ones. Despite this, Abril was confident that she would find true love and live a long, happy life. But she had no idea how her future marriage to the seemingly perfect man would turn out. That man was Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, whom she met in the mid-1990s when her career was taking off. Juan Carlos was just 3 years older than Abril and shared her ambitious drive, which drew her to him. He, in turn, was captivated by her stunning looks, charming personality, kind heart, bright smile, sharp intellect, and remarkable determination. Juan Carlos graduated from a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in economics and trade. He then continued his studies at Harvard University in the United States. After returning to Mexico, he built a successful career in the emerging field of e-commerce. Juan Carlos and Abril met at a conference on the latest financial technologies. Their companies collaborated on several projects, allowing them to cross paths multiple times. Eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had developed feelings for Abril, who was intelligent and beautiful. He obtained her phone number through mutual acquaintances and asked her out on a date. Abril was also attracted to Juan Carlos, finding him to be educated, elegant, and engaging in conversation on a wide range of topics. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by 1998, they decided to get married. At that point, they had both achieved significant success in their careers and were working on developing online stores, a field with great potential. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, inspiring envy and admiration from those around them. However, surface of their perfect family, there were some dark secrets. It wasn't until 2001, 3 years after their wedding, that they had their first child, a daughter named Ana Cecilia. The arrival of their child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband appeared happy, showing their newborn daughter love and admiration. 2 years later, Abril gave birth to a son, named Juan Carlos Jr., after his father. 2 more years passed, and the family had another child, a boy named Julio Andres. Despite having 3 young children, Abril hardly took any time off work and managed to balance parenting with career advancement. She made homemade meals, helped with schoolwork, took the children to sports activities, and aimed to be both a perfect mother and their best friend. Outwardly, The Perez-Sanchez family seemed perfect, wealthy, successful, with 3 lovely children, and everything they could want. However, their home life remained a secret, even from their closest relatives, for a long time. In the early years of their relationship, Juan Carlos revealed his true personality to Abril. He had a short temper, was aggressive, and had a tendency to be overly harsh, refusing to compromise and insisting that everything be done his way. Initially, Abril was in love and believed that as time passed, Juan Carlos's rough edges would smooth out. Their shared projects brought them together, and their collaboration led to significant accomplishments, including financial success. However, as the years went by, Juan Carlos's irritability grew, and verbal arguments escalated into physical confrontations. Following the birth of their first daughter, he made a brief effort to control his emotions, but this change was short-lived. A similar attempt was made after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time their third child arrived, Juan Carlos no longer made any effort to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos frequently directed his anger and frustration at Abril and disregarding her emotional well-being. He would insult and belittle her, the mother of his children, and seemed to feel better when she cried. He regularly physically harmed her, doing so in a way that left no visible marks, allowing her to hide the bruises with clothing or makeup. His goal was to maintain his reputation as a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept quiet about the abuse for years, not even telling her sister and mother about the ongoing situation. She earned a good income and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and stable upbringing. However, her husband was wealthy and influential, and she knew he could use the courts to take the children away from her. Knowing Juan Carlos's true nature, Abril couldn't bear the thought of her children being left alone with him, as she considered him a monster capable of anything. When the family's situation reached a boiling point, what was once considered an ideal household now raised suspicions that something was terribly wrong. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed and visibly struggling. She had lost weight, slept poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that were becoming harder to hide and explain. Despite this, Juan Carlos appeared calm and confident in public, pretending that everything was fine. He played the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with Abril politely and affectionately. However, at home, he transformed into a menacing figure. Despite loved ones urging Abril to divorce him, she insisted that everything was fine and that she could handle the problems with her husband on her own. 2014 marked the peak of Juan Carlos' career when he became the head of a major trading company, making him one of the most influential people in his field. Following this promotion, his family relocated to Mexico City, settling into a large house in one of the capital's upscale neighborhoods. Their children began attending an elite private school. Abril had genuinely hoped that this change of environment would improve their relationship. However, contrary to her expectations, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos often persisted in physically and verbally abusing his wife in front of their children. He increasingly accused her of infidelity without any basis for his claims. Whenever she tried to defend herself, he would resort to physical violence, insisting he would find evidence of her supposed disloyalty. Juan Carlos monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and when finding no evidence, he hired a private detective to follow her and photograph any men who came near her. For 4 years, she tried every possible way to save her marriage. Despite her efforts, her husband's behavior became increasingly unbearable, creating a never-ending nightmare for her. To outsiders, however, their union appeared happy and successful, even enviable, due to her husband's wealth, influence, and seemingly caring nature. In 2018, the Juan Carlos and Abril visited to the Abril's family. During this trip, Juan Carlos treated his wife poorly in front of her parents, who were deeply disturbed by what they saw. This incident marked a turning point for Abril, and she realized that she could no longer continue living this way. She informed her husband that she would file for divorce as soon as they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, Juan Carlos became enraged, grabbed her throat, and squeezed it so tightly that she nearly lost consciousness. Fortunately, her mother, Maria del Soro, entered the room and raised the alarm, preventing a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril prepared for divorce and moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room. However, this did not keep her safe from her husband's abuse. On January 4th, while Abril was still asleep, her husband entered the room holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Abril barely understood what was happening, but she managed to roll off the bed just in time, saving her own life. She began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat away from his father. Together, they fled the house and headed to the hospital, as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed Abril with a severe concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow that required stitches. After Abril and their sons left the house, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to discuss the situation and asked for help in resolving the marital conflict. However, Juan Carlos also posted on social media, accusing his wife of betraying him by being unfaithful and planning to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to claim all their jointly acquired assets. Additionally, Juan Carlos claimed that Abril had stolen all the money from their home safe and had injured him with a knife when he tried to stop her. He posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor as evidence. However, the blood on the floor actually belonged to Abril from her own injury, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Despite the fabrication, Juan Carlos's friends believed his story and actively shared and reposted his account on their social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this supposedly egregious case. Juan Carlos's attempt to kill Abril prompted her to take swift action. From her hospital bed, she filed a police report against him, accusing him of trying to take her life. After her release from the hospital, Abril packed up her two young sons and left the family home. Her oldest child, who was attending college in a nearby city, also condemned his father's violent actions. While waiting for justice, she started providing online support and consultations to women who were going through similar experiences. She also planned to open a center that would offer psychological and legal help to victims of domestic violence who had been failed by the justice system. It wasn't until 8.5 months after the incident, in September 2019, that Juan Carlos was finally arrested and charged with inflicting bodily harm and attempting to kill his wife. He was put in jail, where he spent over a month, but he managed to appeal the decision to keep him in detention before his trial. As a result, he was released from jail by November of that year. Judge Federo presided over the case, reclassifying it and ordering a new trial. During the trial, Abril's medical records and photos were not presented as evidence. Her and her son's testimonies were deemed insufficient to detain Juan Carlos, because he claimed Abril was manipulating their children against him. The judge released Juan Carlos, concluding his actions didn't pose a direct threat to Abril's life. Abril was shocked and terrified when Juan Carlos was released. She suspected he had bribed his way to freedom, putting her and their children in danger. She wrote to the judge, expressing her fear, but it had no immediate effect. Juan Carlos then initiated a custody battle, forcing Abril to return to Mexico City with their sons to attend court hearings. Abril arrived in Mexico City on November 25th with her children. She had a legitimate fear of her longtime partner and wanted to avoid him. To minimize the risk of an encounter, she planned to leave the city immediately after a court hearing that day. In fact, she had already bought the plane ticket, but Juan Carlos already knew that. After the court session, Abril, her sons, and their lawyer got into a car headed to the airport. However, they never made it to their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist suddenly pulled up next to their car, drew a handgun, and fired 2 shots at Abril, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. The attacker then quickly fled the scene. A shooting occurred, and one of the bullets grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat. Fortunately, none of the children were seriously injured. However, the injured Abril was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors fought to save her life for more than 6 hours. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save her. Abril passed away that evening. The victim's family, including her parents, brother, and sister, immediately flew to the capital and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, whom they believed was behind the brutal act. However, law enforcement had a different perspective, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to determine the motive behind the attack. They also noted that they could not confirm with certainty that the shooting was ordered by Juan Carlos. The tragic case of murder sparked widespread outrage and public debate. Abril's family successfully drew attention to the case, highlighting numerous instances where men had attempted to kill women but escaped punishment. In response to the public outcry, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office launched a new investigation into the suspect, Juan Carlos Sanchez, and also examined the actions of the judges who had previously released him. The judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for their role in the Abril death if his guilt was proven. Juan Carlos took to social media to demand justice for his former wife's murder. However, his daughter, Ana Cecilia, accused him of cruelty and shared photos of her mother's hospitalization after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat, contradicting her father's claims that he would never harm her mother. Despite the media attention surrounding the case, he was initially allowed to remain free during the investigation. However, he was required to check in with the police weekly and was placed under a restraining order. When he failed to appear at the scheduled time, a warrant was issued for his arrest for violating the order. As expected, Juan Carlos could not be found, and it was later discovered that he had used his wealth and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting Juan Carlos as a fugitive accused of a serious crime, and he was subsequently declared wanted worldwide. Meanwhile, efforts were underway to locate criminals in Abril's assassination. Surveillance footage from street cameras revealed that the motorcyclist who committed the crime was not alone. 2 vehicles were seen following the car carrying Abril. The motorcyclist appeared to be in constant communication with the occupants of these vehicles, receiving directions and instructions. After several months of investigation, some of the participants were identified, and on March 5, 2020, 2 suspects were arrested in connection with the case. To everyone's surprise, the suspects did not resist arrest and quickly began cooperating with authorities, hoping to receive lighter sentences. It was confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime, and he had paid a significant amount of money to individuals who were directly involved in the crime. The first to be caught were the driver of one of the getaway cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It was discovered that while Juan Carlos was in prison, he had hired 2 experienced criminals to act as his personal bodyguards. One of these bodyguards was released from prison a week before Juan Carlos, and the other was released several days after him. After being released from prison, Juan Carlos reconnected with his accomplices and asked them to recruit trustworthy individuals to help carry out the murder of a person in exchange for a large sum of money. Once all participants were in place, Juan Carlos provided detailed instructions about the intended victim's travel schedule and mode of transportation. However, luring his former wife to Mexico City proved to be a challenge. Juan Carlos used coercion, threatening to take their children unless she attended a court appearance. Despite attending the court date, his ex-wife intended to return to Monterrey on the same day, which Juan Carlos knew about through his sources. 3 more individuals involved in the conspiracy were arrested in late October 2020. Initially, they were taken into custody on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, But further investigation at the police station revealed their potential connection to the high-profile crime. The arrested individuals were part of a major drug trafficking gang led by Balto, who had previously served time with Juan Carlos and offered him protection. In exchange for a significant reward, Balto agreed to help Juan Carlos eliminate his ex-wife. A few weeks later, in November 2020, Maldonado, an individual involved in the case, was also arrested. During his testimony, he confirmed that Juan Carlos had sought out reliable individuals to kill his ex-wife and that he had agreed to assist in exchange for a substantial reward. The investigation confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime. His earlier attack on Abril with a stick was reclassified as an attempted murder. As a result, the court issued an arrest warrant for Juan Carlos on charges of femicide. However, his location remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining suspects involved in the murder of Abril were apprehended. One of them was already serving time for a separate crime. The searches also led to the discovery of the gun used to kill Abril. In total, 9 individuals linked to the same criminal organization were detained, with 7 of them directly involved in the pursuit and shooting of Abril. More than 4 years after the Abril murder, the mastermind behind the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, is still on the run and his location is unknown. Meanwhile, the man who fired the fatal shot has been convicted and sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 accomplices who participated in the car chase and coordinated with the shooter have each been sentenced to 50 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay Cutshall was born in 1982 in the small town of White Eyes, Ohio, to a devoutly Christian family. Her father was a pastor, and she was raised with strong religious values. Despite her strict upbringing, Lindsay was an adventurous and active child who enjoyed sports and later developed a passion for hiking and extreme tourism. After completing her education, Lindsay attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia, where she honed her outdoor skills. She regularly went on hikes, climbed mountains, and rafted down rivers, often organizing her own expeditions. Lindsay's dream was to establish a summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them wilderness survival skills, rafting, and other outdoor activities. Jason Allen was born in 1978 in Zeeland, Michigan, to a deeply religious family. As a teenager, he became fascinated with hiking and wilderness survival. Jason was a tall, athletic, and charismatic individual who possessed natural leadership qualities, which drew like-minded people to him. He was passionate about exploring new heights and mastering outdoor skills. Lindsay and Jason met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. At the time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. They quickly formed a connection after meeting for the first time, leading the young man to ask for her hand in marriage just 6 months later. Both sets of parents gave their approval, and the young man proposed to his girlfriend with a beautiful diamond ring. Shortly after, he gave her a second engagement ring. As a couple, they made ambitious plans for their future. They intended to get married in September 2004 and buy a spacious house to raise a family. But things didn't turn out as expected. Before their wedding, they worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water in California's El Dorado County. Their goal was to gain experience and eventually open their own camp after the wedding. On the Friday evening of August 14th, Lindsay and Jason decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. Before leaving, they informed their colleagues of their plans and left 2 experienced counselors in charge of the camp, ensuring a smooth transition. They told everyone they would return by Monday, expecting no issues for either themselves or their temporary replacements. With their plan in place, they set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, and unfortunately, this was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, Jason and Lindsay, both counselors, had not returned to camp, but their absence did not raise immediate concern. It was assumed they would arrive late that night or early Monday. However, when they failed to appear at the Monday morning roll call at 8 a.m. and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues grew worried. The group quickly notified the police and then reached out to Jason and Lindsay's families to inform them about the situation. The parents went to the camp right away to get more information about the incident. Their colleagues were particularly concerned because Jason and Lindsay were known for their reliability and punctuality. If they had encountered any issues, they would have likely found a way to communicate. Upon arriving at the camp, law enforcement officials began questioning their colleagues, but the investigation quickly hit a roadblock. No one knew exactly where Jason and Lindsay had gone. They had planned to explore the San Francisco area, but their love for adventure and extreme activities made it likely that they were in a remote location with no access to communication or civilization. The police decided to wait for 48 hours, allowing the missing couple a window to possibly return home by themselves. In the meantime, concerned relatives and friends didn't want to delay any longer, and therefore decided to start searching. They reached out to everyone in their network, trying to gather information about the last time someone had contact with they. A missing person flyer featuring a photo of they was circulated, asking witnesses to report any potential sightings right away. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search. The main focus was on the San Francisco area, its surrounding suburbs, and nearby localities. However, the large terrain made it challenging to thoroughly search every inch. A friend's insight that they frequently visited the secluded and picturesque rocky beaches led the police to concentrate on these locations. As the search effort dragged on for days, with several bodies found in sleeping bags in the targeted areas, the likelihood of finding they alive decreased significantly. On Wednesday, August 19th, a helicopter patrol spotted 2 bodies in sleeping bags on a remote rocky beach, indicating that the individuals were likely deceased rather than just resting. Upon arriving at the scene, police found a red Ford Tempo parked near a tourist shelter and a steep trail leading to a scenic beach. The car was identified as belonging to missing student Lindsay Cutshall after a database check. As officers descended the trail, they discovered 2 people in sleeping bags, who initially appeared to be sleeping. However, they did not respond to calls or noise. Closer inspection revealed that the individuals, a young man and woman, were deceased, with no signs of life. Preliminary examination suggested that they had been killed by gunshot wounds to the head, and the smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for over a day. All of their belongings, including phones, wallets, bank cards, and cash, were found next to them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The car keys were also visible, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators initially believed the deceased were the young couple who had gone missing near San Francisco the previous week. Documents found at the scene confirmed the identities of the victims as Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen. However, formal identification by their relatives was still necessary. When the parents arrived, they were overcome with grief upon recognizing the bodies of their children. The investigation led police to rule out initial theories of robbery or carjacking due to the presence of untouched valuables, money, and keys at the scene. Forensic analysis also showed no signs of physical or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the fatal gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were peacefully sleeping and did not have time to react to the attack. They showed no signs of trying to defend themselves, escape, or even get out of their sleeping bags, indicating a sudden and deliberate act that was similar to an execution or a revenge killing. The brutal murder of 2 individuals on a secluded beach left investigators with many questions but no clear answers. The beach was difficult to access, and there were no signs of anyone else being in the area. Despite a thorough search, no shell casings were found, leading investigators to believe that the shooter may have taken them or thrown them into the ocean. The fact that the shots were fired at close range into the victim's head suggested that the casings should have been nearby if they hadn't been deliberately moved. A search of the area revealed an empty beer bottle a few meters from the crime scene. This was notable because Lindsay and Jason did not drink alcohol and led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting that the bottle may have belonged to the shooter. The brand of beer was unusual for the area and was more commonly found in a neighboring state. Although it was unclear whether the bottle was connected to the crime, it was considered a significant lead in the investigation. A theory emerged that Lindsay and Jason may have had a confrontation with someone the day before their deaths, and this person may have returned at night with a gun to settle the dispute. Although Jason and Lindsay were known for being friendly, it was possible they may have unknowingly offended someone. Additionally, the shooter may have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. Examination of the bullets found in the victim's skulls showed they came from a rare Marlin rifle, specifically a .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994 by Marlin Firearms Company. This type of rifle was typically used for hunting and was often part of a collector's arsenal. This discovery was a significant lead in the investigation, but it remained the only concrete clue at the time. Investigation suggested that the shooter was likely a lone male. He may have been a hunter, collector, or gun enthusiast. To further the investigation, authorities aimed to reconstruct their final route, identify who they may have contacted, and determine when they were last seen alive. Fortunately, they had taken many photos, and their camera was found intact among their belongings, which provided a useful starting point for tracking their movements. A guest book at a tourist cabin near the lookout point, where they had parked their car, contained entries expressing their delight with the weekend getaway. They had also visited a fishing pier about 20 miles away on Saturday, as evidenced by the photographs they took. Police officers returned to the pier and interviewed locals to find people who may have seen something significant. Several people remembered a young couple in a red car who inquired about overnight accommodations but found all 3 nearby hotels fully booked due to peak tourist season. They had dinner at a local restaurant, walked around the area, and took photos before leaving in the evening. According to those who saw and interacted with them, they was friendly, did not engage in any conflicts, and seemed carefree and happy. However, none of the witnesses could recall anything unusual or suspicious. The location where the bodies were found was a protected area, closed to camping. However, the young couple had nowhere else to stay overnight, so they decided to camp on the beach, using sleeping bags instead of a tent. They felt safe on the secluded beach on a warm August night and planned to return to the Rock and Water Camp on Sunday. This information helped investigators narrow down the time frame of their deaths. Since they went to sleep but didn't survive until morning, it's likely they were killed between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday. Despite the ongoing investigation and public appeals for information, police withheld certain details, including the results of the ballistics analysis. This action was taken to prevent the suspect from being tipped off and getting rid of the murder weapon before the investigation could start. The investigation first focused on a local homeless man who was known to sleep on the beach where the crime occurred. He was found and questioned by police, but despite not having an alibi for the night of the crime, he was not confirmed to be involved. The main reasons for this were that the murder weapon was never found and his DNA did not match the DNA found on a beer bottle discovered at the crime scene. The case went cold for nearly 2 years, but in the spring of 2006, police decided to release more information about the crime, including details about the weapon used. They also offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and solve the case. Following the public appeal, authorities received over 1,000 calls, but only a few were useful for the investigation. One individual, 26 years old Sean Gallen, drew particular attention from several locals who described him as an aggressive collector of firearms and blades. He was reportedly prone to conflicts, had a history of property damage, and frequently threatened violent behavior. The police investigated Sean Gallen and questioned him because they already knew him from previous incidents involving fights and drunk driving. Upon inspecting his possessions, Sean did possess numerous weapons but did not own the rifle in question. Authorities were unable to verify his whereabouts around the time of the crime due to the year gap, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, forcing his release. Meanwhile, international authorities were investigating another individual, 61 years old Joseph Henry Burgess, who made locals nervous due to his tendency to carry firearms and exhibit aggressive behavior. Burgess was described as erratic, often claiming he received orders from God, sparking suspicion that he could be the perpetrator. Joseph Burgess was living in Canada in the late 1970s, feeling lost and without a clear sense of purpose or direction in his life. In 1978, he joined the Children of God commune, presenting himself as a deeply devoted individual. Those around him considered him excessively zealous. A rivalry with two young members escalated into hostility, and shortly after, both individuals were found dead with multiple close-range gunshot wounds to the head. The circumstances of their deaths were particularly notable. Their bodies were discovered in sleeping bags on a beach, suggesting they were shot while asleep. By the time the authorities arrived, Joseph had disappeared. Although evidence left behind implicated him in the crime, he had already fled to the United States, crossing the border illegally. Joseph managed to evade capture for nearly 25 years until the police linked him to a double homicide in California. However, the opportunity to question him was lost when a shootout occurred during his arrest, resulting in the deaths of both a police sergeant and Joseph, who initiated the gunfire. This ultimately unresolved case remains shrouded in mystery. A 35-year-old man named Seamus Gallen was killed by his younger brother, Sean Gallen. The brothers had gotten into an argument, during which Sean, who was under the influence of illicit substances, shot Seamus 3 times with a gun. Sean had a history with the police, having been previously investigated for a double murder on a beach, but was released due to lack of evidence. Since then, Sean had been in trouble with the law twice for causing property damage and making threats, but only received fines. It was also discovered that Sean was an avid hunter and enjoyed making knives and other bladed weapons. People who knew him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After killing his brother, Sean tried to run away but was caught almost immediately. The police decided to take another look at Sean's possible involvement in a crime that happened 13 years ago. They found useful information on his social media page, where he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and talked about his supposed psychic abilities. According to his posts, Sean believed he was on a special mission and was receiving instructions from outer space. Sean's behavior initially led police to suspect that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke incoherently, and maintained his innocence. A new lead was found by investigators who examined private messages on the deceased brother's social media page, something no one anticipated. In 2006, a $50,000 reward had been offered for information about a double homicide case. Sean's former girlfriend had messaged his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning Sean in. It appeared that both the girlfriend and the brother had knowledge about the case, but they had chosen to remain silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, as the brother had been shot and the girlfriend had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. However, when Sean was shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he made a shocking confession. Despite his initial denials, Sean began to provide a detailed account of the events surrounding the double homicide. His recollection of the details was vivid, even though more than 13 years had passed since the crime occurred. One evening, a man left his house with a Marlin rifle, planning to hunt in a nearby wooded area. However, after wandering aimlessly for a couple of hours, he decided to head down to a nearby beach, which he believed was a good spot to find wild boars. As he walked along the shore, he came across two sleeping bags with a young man and woman asleep inside. He stood there watching them for several minutes, when suddenly he heard voices in his head telling him to kill them. The man claimed that this was a mission from outer space that he had to carry out. So, he pointed his rifle directly at the young man's head and fired, instantly killing him. The sound of the shot woke she, but before she could even process what was happening, the man fired again, killing her as well. He then picked up the spent casings and put them in an empty beer can he had been carrying. Later, he threw the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he also hid the rifle, asking his father to keep it for him. Sean's father hid the murder weapon in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Remarkably, Sean's account of the crime was later confirmed. When the barn eventually collapsed, the rifle was discovered at the site, and a beer can with shell casings was still hidden in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The property's abandonment after Sean's father passed away in 2009 had helped preserve these key pieces of evidence. A beer bottle found on the beach was initially considered evidence, but it was later discovered to be unrelated to the crime. Sean claimed that voices in his head ordered him to commit violent acts and that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the crime. His defense argued that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. The court relied on expert psychiatrists to assess the validity of these claims. The psychiatric evaluation found that Sean did indeed suffer from multiple mental health disorders, which were exacerbated by his use of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, the evaluation also showed that at the time of the crime, Sean acted with deliberation and careful planning, fully aware of his actions and the need to cover his tracks to avoid detection. Specifically, Sean deliberately killed the young man first, knowing that she would be less able to resist or defend herself if anything went wrong. Sean carefully removed the casings and handed the rifle to his father, instructing him to conceal it. Although psychiatrists diagnosed Sean with mental issues, they concluded he was mentally fit to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. Notably, his family and former girlfriend were aware of or suspected his involvement in the double homicide, yet none of them reported him to the police. Sean's trial took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the double homicide. On June 17, 2019, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus an additional 94 years for killing his brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for inmates with mental disorders. Due to his continued claims of hearing voices and aggressive behavior, he is closely monitored to prevent harm to himself or others. The motive behind the double homicide was never established. According to reports, Sean randomly encountered they sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives without apparent reason. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, a small town in Stormont County, Ontario. Little is known about his family and early life. He remained single and childless, working as a gas station attendant and a security guard on film sets. Those who knew him described Adam as quirky and eccentric, often coming across as superior to others. He enjoyed debating and arguing to prove his point, but was not typically confrontational. A review of his social media profiles revealed Adam's interest in BDSM practices, which he openly discussed and shared photos and videos about. Although he never had a long-term partner, some former partners accused him of being a sadist who subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, leading to the end of their relationships. Adam also had a peculiar hobby of writing reviews of adult films and magazines. It appeared that watching such content was a significant part of his free time. Despite his unusual interests, Adam presented himself as a calm and composed individual, showing no outward signs of a troubled or criminal nature. The story took an unexpected turn 4 months later when at the end of December, when David Wood's family moved into the house at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa, they were immediately struck by a strange and unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, Adam Strong, a 45-year-old single man who lived in the other half of the house, reassured them that it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix within a few days. Although Adam was friendly and polite in his communication, there was something unsettling about him that put the Wood family on edge. When David's wife tried to welcome him with some homemade cookies, Adam wouldn't even let her into his apartment. Instead, he stepped out into the hallway, closing his door behind him. In that brief moment, David's wife caught a glimpse of Adam's living space, which was in disarray, and the smell inside was overpowering and foul. Adam borrowed cookies from his new neighbor and quickly left. Later, when they met in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that his apartment was a mess due to upcoming renovations. Despite his efforts to be polite, he seemed nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore a persistent smell. However, on December 29th, they called a plumber to fix a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. The problem seemed minor, but what the workers found in the pipes shocked even experienced forensic experts. Plumber Sean Funn and his partner began to clear the blockage in the Woods' apartment. Although they were accustomed to unpleasant odors, they were surprised by the terrible smell inside. They soon realized they needed to investigate further and descended to the apartment below, which belonged to a man named Adam. Adam reluctantly let the workers in, apologizing for the mess. The smell was even worse in his apartment, and when the plumbers reached the source of the blockage, the stench became unbearable. Sean, a seasoned plumber, had never encountered anything as foul-smelling as this in his years of practice. However, an even more disturbing discovery awaited him and his team when they decided to clear the pipe. Adam, already on edge, became increasingly agitated, refusing to step away and bombarding the workers with questions about their methods and estimated time of completion. He later claimed he was simply curious, having never witnessed this process before. The specialists tried to brush off his behavior, but their efforts were soon overshadowed by the gruesome discovery of over 10 kilograms of flesh, hair, and bone fragments in the pipes. Sean was horrified to find disfigured and partially decomposed human fingers among the debris. Adam feigned surprise, claiming he had never seen anything so disgusting, and then asked the plumbers if they had any idea how this could have ended up in the sewer pipe. Sean decided to call the police immediately to report the disturbing discovery. He informed them that he had likely found human remains and provided the address. He made sure Adam didn't touch or disturb anything, preserving the evidence. When the officers arrived, they quickly confirmed that Sean's suspicions were correct. Human flesh had been extracted from the pipes. The police then spoke with the Adam. He admitted that a woman's body had been stuck in the pipe. He even revealed that other body parts were stored in his refrigerator's freezer. Upon investigation, the police found a severed head and limb fragments packed in plastic bags, which were too large. The house was extremely filthy and cluttered, with a kitchen filled with dirty dishes and rotting food, as well as trash covering the floor. Empty pizza boxes were scattered around, and numerous magazines of an explicit and masochistic nature were present among the mess. Various adult toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and restraint devices were also discovered. Adam Strong was arrested at the scene and taken to the police station for questioning. His arrest puzzled the authorities, as he had no prior run-ins with the law and was not a person of interest to the police. Mr. Adam had resided at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa for over 10 years, dating back to 2007, without incident or complaints from neighbors. The House of Horrors at 19 Macmillan Drive, Adam's residence, was secured and guarded as a crime scene. An initial inspection revealed a complex and time-consuming process lay ahead, with investigators expecting to uncover more shocking evidence. The discovery of a head in the refrigerator was just the beginning. Evidence found at the scene led law enforcement to suspect a connection to Rory Hash, whose torso had been recovered from a body of water 4 months earlier. A tattoo on the neck and subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that the discovered remains belonged to Rory. Further investigation revealed blood-stained clothing and shoes belonging to she, hidden among trash in various rooms of the house. The bedroom was particularly disturbing, with blood traces found on the bed, walls, furniture, and ceiling. These bloodstains were later confirmed to belong to a missing schoolgirl. A dissection table was also found in the kitchen, suggesting it was used to dismember and gut the victim. The entire scene was gruesome, with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments scattered everywhere, causing nausea in those who witnessed it. The bathroom was extremely dirty and unsanitary, with signs of a violent crime visible everywhere, including dirt, blood, and broken fixtures. The toilet was dismantled and lay in a corner, surrounded by garbage. It appeared that the perpetrator, Adam, had attempted to dispose of a body by cutting it into pieces and flushing them down the sewer. However, he encountered a blockage and, when his attempt to fix it failed, left the scene in disarray. Inside the house, a large number of sharp objects were discovered, which likely had been used to dismember the victim. Some of the objects, including knives, still had blood on them. Further analysis of the evidence, including DNA samples, revealed that Adam had semen on fragments of the victim's body, which had been found in the refrigerator. Rory Hash was born on July 9, 1999, in Oshawa, Ontario, to Shannon Dion, a single mother. Rory's father was not present in her life, having left before her birth. Despite this, Rory grew up in a loving and supportive family environment provided by her mother and maternal grandmother. Rory's family had an unconventional background, with her maternal grandfather founding and leading the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. He was also a skilled boxer with connections to organized crime. Additionally, Rory's uncle was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club and led a troubled life, frequently encountering legal issues. However, this did not affect Rory's childhood, which was remarkably peaceful and carefree. Rory excelled academically and had a passion for dance, winning awards in competitions. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, responsible, and compassionate. At the age of 13, Rory earned top honors as a cadet in her local army unit, showcasing her exceptional qualities from a young age. At 15, Rory's life took a downward turn. A friend introduced her to drugs, and she quickly became addicted. She started spending time with the wrong crowd, neglected her schoolwork, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, her family tried to help her overcome her addiction by sending her to various treatment centers, but she relapsed each time. At 17, Rory ran away from home and began working in the sex trade to support her habit. Rory eventually sought help from a specialized service for teenagers struggling with addiction. With their support, she was able to enter mandatory treatment and turn her life around. She found a job at a local shop, studied remotely to earn her high school diploma, and even started thinking about attending college. Rory also started a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony, and they decided to move in together in the spring of 2017. When Rory discovered she was pregnant, she was nearly 18 and felt ready to take on the responsibility of motherhood. Her mother supported her decision, but was unaware that Rory had started using illicit substances again. In mid-August, Rory met with Crane at a shopping center. Crane had been keeping an eye on her for 18 months to ensure she didn't fall back into her old habits. During their meeting, Rory revealed that she had started using drugs again and had lost her job a month prior. She also admitted to exchanging intimate favors for money or drugs. Crane was deeply concerned and promised to help. He asked Rory to wait while he made a call to arrange for her to be hospitalized. However, when he returned, Rory was gone. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her in a state of incoherence due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue for about an hour, but when they returned, Rory was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed that she had simply gotten up and walked out of the hospital. Her family reported her missing the following day, but despite a thorough search and widespread social media attention, Rory was never seen again. Rory's exact circumstances of arrival at Adam's house are unknown, but it is probable that she went there seeking drugs in exchange for sex. The investigation started when Adam informed the police about the location of Rory's remaining body parts. Initially, investigators anticipated Adam would admit to the crime, but when he was taken to the station, he became uncooperative, refused to answer questions, and denied any involvement in Rory's death, all while remaining calm. The only charge filed against Adam was desecration of a body, as there was not enough direct evidence to link him to the murder. Despite his lawyer's efforts, Adam was not granted bail and stayed in jail until his trial. Investigators attempted to get Adam to reveal more information by provoking an emotional response, but he remained cautious and avoided discussing Rory's visit to his house and his potential involvement in her death. However, Adam freely talked about his interest in bladed weapons and his large collection of knives. A search of Adam's house uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a dirty hunting knife hidden in a closet with dried skin fragments that appeared to be human. DNA testing revealed that the samples on the knife did not match Rory's, but belonged to someone else. It took several months to identify the person, but by July 2017, investigators had confirmed that the DNA on the knife belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, she who had gone missing about 10 years earlier. Candace shared many similarities with Rory Hash. Both struggled with addiction and had run-ins with the law. They came from troubled families and often ran away from home, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. To survive, they would often exchange sex for food and other necessities. Candace was born in 1989 and was 18 when she disappeared. Her family did not realize she was missing until almost 2 years later, by which time any potential leads had gone cold. Many people believed that Candace's lifestyle and social circle meant she could have gone anywhere. For 10 years, her parents thought she might have run away and would eventually return home. However, news from law enforcement in 2018 destroyed their hope of ever seeing their daughter alive again. A striking feature of the case was the physical resemblance between Candace and another victim, who was the same age. The police believed they had caught a serial offender. The suspect, Adam, also confessed to harming Candace. However, Adam refused to provide information about Rory unless the police agreed to improve his prison conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet, and his favorite meals. Although law enforcement was outraged by Adam's demands, they agreed in order to gain valuable information. Adam began by sharing his troubled childhood, revealing that he was abused by his stepfather from age 5 and started harming animals at age 7, deriving physical pleasure from these acts. He also discussed his unusual intimate preferences and expressed frustration at not finding a partner who shared these interests. When discussing Rory, Adam described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in the act, but later regretted his plumbing had failed him. However, when questioned by police, Adam denied responsibility for her death, claiming she had died from an overdose and he had only disposed of the body. When asked about Candace, a case from 10 years prior, Adam was caught off guard and attempted to learn how the police had discovered the connection. Upon hearing about the human remains found on an old knife, Adam became subdued and regretted not taking better precautions to avoid detection. He admitted to meeting Candace but denied killing her. Despite a lack of evidence to support his claims, Adam unintentionally incriminated himself during the investigation. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he shared his account of events. However, when informed that the victim, Rory, was pregnant at the time of her death, Adam strongly denied this fact. The police noted that the pregnancy was in its early stages and therefore not visibly apparent. Adam claimed that he would have noticed if she was pregnant, sparking a realization among the investigators that he would stop at nothing to argue his point. To uncover more information, the police told Adam that Rory was pregnant, which led him to attempt to prove the contrary. In his eagerness to refute this, he shared graphic details about how he had personally examined her body and held her reproductive organs in his hands. Adam's account was detailed and included his physical sensations, describing the flesh as soft and warm. At one point, he even mentioned feeling a pulse. These statements raised suspicions that Rory may have still been alive at the time. Unfortunately for Adam, his entire narrative was captured on camera, and his incriminating statements were presented as evidence in court. When confronted about his earlier statements, Adam tried to retract his previous admissions, but it was too late. The defendant, Adam Strong, refused to reveal what he had done with Candace's body, and despite extensive searches, her remains were never found. Investigators also failed to identify any other potential victims. During one of the final interrogations, Strong showed no remorse, saying, "I don't know if it matters, but I'd like to extend my condolences to her parents." During the trial, Strong's lawyers argued that he was mentally ill and therefore not responsible for his actions, claiming he needed medical treatment rather than punishment. However, the court had to decide whether he was sane and accountable for his crimes or if he should be committed to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. A psychiatric evaluation found that although Strong had certain mental health disorders, he was aware of his actions and could be held legally responsible. Strong's trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace disappeared. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted guilt, the evidence found in his home and his statements during interrogations confirmed his involvement in these horrific crimes. 4 of Adam's former partners testified against him, describing his cruel and violent behavior. The prosecution presented evidence that Adam had lured 2 women to his home with promises of money in exchange for intimate services that catered to his specific preferences. Once they were in his home, he would immobilize and torment them for an extended period. In the case of Rory, he likely killed her during the ordeal because he feared she would report him to the police. On September 4th, a signal from Adam's phone was detected near the city harbor, where he had discarded Rory's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was found guilty of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, as well as desecrating Rory's remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Adam showed little remorse, stating that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months after his sentencing, Adam unexpectedly revealed the location of Candace's remains. Following his directions, the police conducted a months-long search that ultimately led to the discovery of human bones. DNA testing confirmed the skeleton's identity as young Candace Fitzpatrick, and this was officially announced. Investigators now strongly suspect that there may be at least one more female victim in the Adam case. During Adam's initial interrogation, his personal belongings were seized, including a chain with 3 rings. Adam asked for the chain's return, explaining that the rings held sentimental value and he didn't want to lose them. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their daughters, but the origin of the 3rd ring remains unknown. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel O'Reilly. Rachel O'Reilly was born in 1974 in County Dublin, Ireland. Her biological parents are unknown, but she was adopted at a young age by Rose and Jim Calley, who raised her along with their 4 other adopted children. Rachel was a responsible and driven child. She excelled in school, played sports, helped with household chores, and never caused any trouble. As she grew up, she became a sociable, open, and exceptionally kind person. She got along with everyone and avoided conflict whenever possible. As a teenager, Rachel was a skilled softball player, participating in numerous competitions and setting local records. Her closest relationship was with her adoptive mother, Rose, with whom she shared all her secrets and stayed in close touch even after she got married and had children of her own. Rachel decided to pursue a degree in marketing from a local university after completing high school. She also landed a job as a salesperson at a city department store and continued to play sports for a local team in her free time. Joe O'Reilly, born in 1972 in County Dublin, Joe grew up in a simple family as the second child of his parents, with an older sister. His parents instilled in him the value of hard work and self-reliance, not spoiling him or his sister. Joe was a tall and athletic boy who enjoyed playing softball. After high school, he chose to study advertising through correspondence and took a job as a manager at a department store. A few months later, Rachel would start working at the same store. Joe was 19 years old when he first met Rachel, who was just 17. He was immediately drawn to her and introduced himself, but despite being charmed by her bright smile and blonde hair, she refused to go on a date with him. Undeterred, Joe began to try to win her over, showering her with compliments and small gifts, such as flowers and chocolates, which he would leave at her workstation in the morning. However, no matter how hard he tried, Rachel remained unimpressed. The entire department store staff was entertained by Joe's attempts to get Rachel's attention, and it even became a running joke. Despite initial challenges, Joe persevered. He made an effort to read Rachel's favorite book, hoping to find common ground for conversation. However, it wasn't until he discovered her passion for softball that he made significant progress. Joe attended one of her games, joined in during practice, and showcased his skills on the field. As a result, the team won, and Rachel was finally impressed by his determination and athletic abilities. She agreed to go on a date with him, and their relationship began to blossom. As they spent more time together, Joe went to great lengths to prove his commitment and affection. He planned a surprise trip to Paris, a city he knew Rachel would love. In a romantic gesture, he proposed to her at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Rachel was overwhelmed by the surprise and happily accepted his proposal. She thought she had found her perfect match, a true prince who would make her happy for the rest of her life. A few years after their wedding, they had 2 sons. They moved to a peaceful and scenic area in Scotland, where they bought a spacious and cozy home, ideal for raising their children. After the birth of their first son, Rachel left her job to focus on taking care of her family. 2 years later, their second son was born, and Rachel dedicated herself to raising their children. Meanwhile, Joe secured a job at an advertising agency, specializing in outdoor advertising, which proved to be a successful career move for him. Those who knew Joe personally described him as a confident, driven, and charming individual. At work, he demonstrated his responsibility, expertise, and attention to detail. As they grew older and started attending kindergarten, Rachel began working as a distributor for a popular cosmetics company and selling household goods to earn extra income. This job allowed her to interact more with her neighbors, who praised her as a wonderful mother and a kind, open person. Meanwhile, Joe became increasingly absent from home, only returning to sleep, shower, and change clothes. He attributed his absence to his demanding work schedule and an upcoming promotion he was eagerly anticipating. Rachel supported Joe as best she could, but as time passed, they started to drift apart, and their family relationships began to deteriorate significantly. A disturbing incident occurred in the summer of 2004 when an anonymous person sent a letter to Child Protective Services, falsely accusing Rachel of being a bad mother who mistreated her sons. In response, a special commission visited their home to investigate the allegations. Although the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, and relatives and neighbors described Rachel as a loving and caring mother, the malicious letter damaged her reputation. On the morning of Monday, October 4, 2004, the O'Reilly household began as usual. Joe, the father, left for work at dawn while his wife, Rachel, and their sons were still asleep. Throughout the day, Joe tried to contact Rachel by texting and calling her, but she didn't respond. He then called their home phone, but the answering machine picked up, and Joe left a worried message, asking Rachel to call him back as soon as possible. Later that afternoon, Joe received a call from the kindergarten teacher, informing him that Rachel had not arrived to pick up their sons, which was unusual. Joe then called his mother-in-law, Rose, to ask if she knew Rachel's whereabouts. When Rose said she didn't know, Joe asked her to check on their house and see if everything was okay. Meanwhile, Joe went to the kindergarten to pick up the children. When Rose arrived at the house, she found Rachel's car in the yard, indicating that Rachel was home. However, the house was dark and quiet, and Rose's calls went unanswered. As Rose entered the house, she was immediately struck by the scene of chaos before her. Cabinets and drawers were open, with their contents scattered all over the floor, giving the appearance of a robbery. Upon entering the bedroom, Rose's was met with a horrific sight. Rachel lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by a massive pool of her own blood. The walls, furniture, and even the ceiling were splattered with blood, and Rachel's tangled, bloody hair partially concealed her skull. In some places, the bare bones of her skull were visible. Rose rushed to her daughter, hoping against hope that she was still alive and could be saved. But when she touched Rachel's arm, she felt it was cold and stiff. It was clear that Rachel had been dead for hours, and there was nothing that could be done to help her. Overcome with grief and unable to collect her thoughts, Rose began screaming and calling for help. She then rushed to the phone to dial the police. Her screams alerted the neighbors, one of whom was a doctor. The doctor was the first to examine the body and confirm that Rachel was beyond help. When Joe arrived at the house, he was met with a crowd of people who had already gathered there. Upon learning of his wife's death, he was overcome with grief, screaming and running inside the house, exclaiming that he didn't believe the news. In the bedroom, he became hysterical beside his wife's body, crying and vowing to kill the person responsible for her murder. According to the police officers who responded to the scene, the crime was one of the most brutal they had ever encountered. The victim, Rachel, had been beaten to death with a heavy blunt object with incredible force. It appeared that she had been attacked from behind, as she showed no signs of having tried to resist or fight back. At first, the scene resembled a robbery, but the investigators' instincts suggested that the brutality of the attack indicated a personal motive or intense dislike. However, it was unclear who would have wanted to harm the Rachel, who was a mother of two. The detectives began by interviewing Rachel's family members and neighbors, who all confirmed that she was a friendly person with no known enemies or conflicts. None of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious on the day of the murder. Joe provided an alibi, stating that he was at the bus depot on the other side of town for work, which could be corroborated by a coworker. The scene looked like a robbery, but nothing valuable was taken. A €1,000 note was left untouched on the bedside table, and another stash of money was found in a kitchen cupboard, also untouched. A jewelry box on the dressing table was disturbed, but only a pair of chains and earrings were missing, found separately in a drawer. The homeowner reported that a digital camera, silverware, and one of his dumbbells, likely the murder weapon, were missing. The investigation found the situation suspicious. The house was in disarray, and Rachel was brutally murdered, yet only a few items were taken. Joe, answering police questions, was visibly shaken, crying, and feverish. However, one investigator believed that Joe's behavior seemed more like nervous excitement than grief or shock. When asked if his wife might have had an affair, Joe's demeanor changed, and he confidently denied it. He then added that he had not cheated on his wife, but this statement seemed unconvincing. A bag containing stolen items from the house was discovered in the bushes, 2 miles from the crime scene. The bag held a camera, silverware, and a few pieces of jewelry, all of which were on the list of stolen items compiled by Joe. This new evidence led investigators to rule out the possibility of a robbery and reclassify the case as a premeditated murder. As a result, Joe, who had been trying to appear grief-stricken, became the prime suspect. His attempts to convey pain and sorrow seemed insincere, raising suspicions about his involvement in the crime. Joe didn't have an alibi to present, so the detectives had to investigate the details of his day to piece together what happened. According to Joe, he started the morning by stopping at the gym, a routine he followed regularly. The surveillance cameras in the gym's parking lot and inside the gym confirmed his presence. After his gym visit, Joe drove to the office and then headed to a remote bus station in the city to check on the placement of advertisements on buses. A colleague corroborated Joe's account, recalling a phone conversation they had around that time. The investigators then visited Joe's workplace to inspect his computer. This led to a significant discovery. Joe's email contained some suspicious messages that he had partially deleted. Specialists were able to recover the deleted emails, and the police became convinced they were on the right track. Most of the recovered emails were exchanges with Joe's friend and sister, in which he frequently complained about his wife, Rachel, using derogatory language and profanity. Joe's wife had not been attractive to him for a long time, and in fact, he felt a strong sense of disgust towards her. Meanwhile, investigators discovered a suspicious correspondence between Joe and a female colleague named Nikki Pell. Their communication suggested that they were more than just friends and warranted further questioning. Nikki Pell worked at the same advertising company as Joe and was 10 years his senior. Despite their age difference, they had begun an affair. It was unclear when exactly their workplace romance started, but it was evident that Joe spent a significant amount of time with Nikki, often staying late into the evenings and even nights. Joe's wife was unaware of this and was misled into believing that he was busy with work. What was even more alarming was the content of Joe's messages to Nikki, in which he promised that they would soon be together, referring to her as a potential stepmother to his children with his wife, Rachel. Such messages raised suspicions, especially considering that in the event of a divorce, the children would likely remain with their mother. Joe initially denied having an affair, but when faced with irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, he was forced to admit to secretly dating Nikki for some time. Although they had reportedly broken up for over a week before the incident. This revelation raised questions. Following the discovery of the body, the O'Reilly house was sealed off as a crime scene, and no one was allowed to enter while the police conducted a thorough investigation. During this time, Joe stayed with his sister, and the children stayed with their grandparents. At the funeral, Joe was surprisingly calm and appeared to avoid the casket containing his deceased wife's body. When it was his turn to say goodbye, he did so hastily and without emotion. As he left, he appeared unconcerned, saying that the casket could be closed and buried once the family was allowed to return home. When they returned, everything in the house appeared to be in the same condition as the day of the murder, except for the body on the floor. Joe asked his in-laws to accompany him to the scene of the crime, and they agreed, thinking he needed their emotional support. However, as they walked around the room where Rachel had been murdered, Joe began to speculate about the killer's actions. He graphically described the attack, pointing to dried blood spatters and reenacting the blows with his arms. Joe suggested that the perpetrator might have washed his hands and the crime weapon in the bathroom before taking it with him. Although his detailed and unsettling account seemed like an attempt to process his grief, his parents-in-law couldn't shake the feeling that he was reenacting the crime. Rose, in particular, secretly suspected that Joe might have been the one who killed their daughter. Immediately following the funeral, Joe began aggressively seeking media attention. He granted numerous interviews and even invited reporters into his home, providing them with a tour of the crime scene while recounting the events that transpired. 3 weeks after the tragedy, the Rachel loved ones agreed to participate in a television program about the crime. However, while Rachel's parents appeared to be overcome with grief, Joe's behavior on set was remarkably different. He interacted with the makeup team, showing concern for his on-camera appearance, and during breaks, he eagerly accepted and enjoyed the offered snacks and coffee, behaving more like a celebrity than a grieving family member. The police, who were still looking at Joe, decided to follow him and found that from the set he went straight to his mistress Nikki, who spent the night. By that time, the last doubts that he was the killer had already been dispelled, and it remained only to collect irrefutable evidence for the court. Collecting evidence proved to be a time-consuming and challenging task. The main piece of evidence, the murder weapon, remained elusive. Despite this, investigators accumulated enough supplementary evidence. Initially, 2 key witnesses, Nikki and Joe's colleague who corroborated his alibi, faced possible imprisonment for perjury, leading them to recant their earlier statements. Nikki revealed that her relationship with Joe never actually ended, they continued to see each other in secret. Rachel, who discovered their ongoing connection, got into a significant argument with Joe and his wife shortly before the tragedy. In contrast, Joe's colleague, although previously vouching for his whereabouts, could not confidently attest that Joe was at the bus station across town at the time of his wife's murder. He unknowingly corroborated his friend's story at his request, unaware that Joe was a suspect in the crime at the time. Emails retrieved from Joe's computer, in which he made disparaging comments about his wife and planned a future with his mistress and children, were also submitted as evidence in the case. Joe made a deliberate attempt to create an alibi by going to the gym and ensuring he was caught on camera. He then informed his colleagues that he would be unavailable due to a work commitment in another part of the city. However, instead of going to the bus station as claimed, Joe went home, armed himself with a dumbbell, and hid in the bedroom, waiting for his wife to return from taking the children to kindergarten. He launched a surprise attack on her from behind, leaving her no opportunity to defend herself. After committing the crime, Joe, who later admitted his actions, cleaned the blood from himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom next to the bedroom. He then changed his clothes, scattered his belongings around the house to make it appear like a robbery had occurred, and headed to work. While on his way to the office, Joe got rid of the items he had taken, disposed of the bloody clothes and dumbbells, and made several attempts to cover his tracks by calling his wife's phone, sending her messages, and leaving voicemails asking her to call him back. At the office, Joe exhibited unusual behavior, appearing overly excited and showing signs of nervousness, as evident from his slightly shaking hands. Some of his colleagues noticed his unusual behavior and asked if he was okay, but Joe seemed flustered and, instead of responding, quickly retreated to his office. Shortly after, he received a call from the daycare center informing him that no one had picked up their boys. Instead of rushing home, Joe sent his mother-in-law to discover his daughter's disfigured body first. He believed he had covered his tracks and that his guilt would be impossible to prove. However, his desire for fame and public attention ultimately worked against him. Although most of the evidence against Joe was circumstantial, he was not arrested until 2 years after the crime. His guilt was ultimately proven by tracing his movements on the day of the murder, using data from a cell phone he had kept with him. Notably, at the time of the murder, Joe's cell phone signal was tracked to the home, a fact later confirmed by phone records. Furthermore, it was revealed during the trial that the anonymous letter sent to Child Protective Services, which made false accusations against Rachel, was actually written by Joe's mother at his request. Joe's motive for the murder was to gain sole custody of the children in the event of a divorce. To achieve this, he attempted to discredit Rachel by portraying her as an abusive mother. However, social services found no evidence to support these claims, and Joe decided to take more drastic action. Joe showed no remorse in the courtroom, smiling and chatting with his lawyers as if he was confident he would be acquitted. However, in the summer of 2007, the court delivered a guilty verdict and sentenced him to life in prison. Despite the defense team's efforts to appeal the decision, all their attempts were unsuccessful. Interestingly, Joe's relationship with his mistress, Nikki, continued even after his imprisonment. She visited him regularly for many years, but they suddenly lost contact in 2022. Throughout his imprisonment, Joe has maintained his innocence and has been a model inmate, never causing any trouble. He hopes that this good behavior will eventually make him eligible for parole. Back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in San Cristobal, Verapaz, a small town, to a modest family. She was the youngest of two children. Her parents, Al Morales and Brian, raised her along with her older brother, Omar. Luz Maria's early life was marked by a serious health scare. As an infant, she nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction and underwent a complex surgery. Although her doctors were uncertain about her chances of recovery, her mother's prayers and faith played a significant role in Luz Maria's survival. Fortunately, the surgery did not affect Luz Maria's development. She grew up to be a healthy and active child. During her school years, Luz Maria was a sporty. She was actively involved in gymnastics, athletics, and classical dance. She easily makes friends with everyone and got along with people from different backgrounds. Luz Maria excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After completing her secondary education, Luz Maria decided to pursue higher education at a prestigious state university. She chose to study law and later specialized in criminalistics, a field that had always fascinated her. A fateful encounter took place when Luz Maria accompanied her mother to a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. The occasion was her older brother's 25th birthday, and the family wanted to surprise him with a motorcycle he had always desired. Inside the dealership, they were warmly greeted by a courteous and attentive young sales consultant named Jorge, who showcased the available models, offering some advice. Although Luz Maria and her mother have already chosen a model, but they want to consider and discuss it with her father before making a decision to buy it. As they left, they took a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria left her phone number for further communication. Shortly after, she received a call from Jorge himself, but instead of discussing the potential purchase, the conversation turned to a more personal subject. Over the following days, Jorge contacted Luz Maria several times, gradually building up the courage to invite her to meet at a coffee shop. Jorge was clearly smitten with Luz Maria, the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he didn't know how to approach her. Luckily, Luz Maria also liked Jorge, and when he asked to meet, she happily agreed. Although Luz Maria was a year younger, their small age difference wasn't an issue. They fell deeply in love, both believing it was love at first sight, and that a long, happy life was ahead. A few short months into their relationship, they decided to live together, despite parental objections. They had a small, private wedding, attended only by close friends and family. However, their special day almost got derailed due to a mishap at the banquet venue. They had to cough up extra cash to save the celebration, which wedding ultimately took place on schedule. Jorge was born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina, a town in central Guatemala. Jorge and his younger brother, Pablo, grew up in a low-income household. His family struggled financially, so as children, they did not have the luxury of fine clothes and expensive toys, as the family's limited income only covered the most basic needs. Even though Jorge grew up in difficult circumstances, he seemed to have no motivation to change his life for the better. He lived life at his own pace, choosing to enjoy simple pleasures rather than strive for advanced degrees or job security. Those who knew Jorge described him as introverted, unsociable, and having few close relationships, especially with women. When he met the love of his life, Luz Maria, he went all out to win her heart and quickly proposed, fearing she might change her mind. However, Luz Maria's parents, Morales and Brian, were suspicious of him from the start. They couldn't quite put their finger on what it was about him that they didn't like, but they couldn't convince their daughter to call off the wedding. The marriage turned out to be unhappy. After the wedding, Luz Maria became pregnant, but she had not yet finished her university degree and struggled to find a good job. Due to her lack of experience and health issues, she had to accept short-term, low-skilled jobs. Meanwhile, her husband lost his job and was in no hurry to find a new one. When their daughter, Alice, was born, the family's financial situation became more difficult. Both spouses were unemployed, and they had no money to pay rent, buy food, or pay for the family's basic needs. Jorge convinced Luz Maria that their only option was to temporarily move in with his parents. Luz Maria was initially hesitant, but facing no alternative and having a baby to care for, she eventually gave her consent. Luz Maria's mother was aware of the problems her daughter was facing in her marriage, but despite mother concerns, Luz Maria was optimistic that things would improve. Luz Maria assured her mother that everything would get better soon, so her mother decided to visit her and see how she was doing. However, when she went to Luz Maria's husband's house to see her daughter, she was shocked by what she found. Luz Maria was in a terrible state, eating only once a day and very little at that. This was partly due to Jorge's family not providing her with enough food, even though she was unemployed and breastfeeding her young daughter. The lack of food was only one of many problems Luz Maria faced in her in-laws' home. She was constantly belittled and even physically abused by her husband's younger brother. He was annoyed by the sound of the baby crying and the presence of children's belongings in the house. On several occasions, he threw items at Luz Maria, including a baby bottle that hit her and her daughter, Alice, who was in her arms. Despite witnessing these events, Jorge just stood by and did nothing to protect his wife and children, he treating them as if they were strangers. Morales convinces her daughter to take her granddaughter to her maternal home. Jorge arrived shortly afterwards, asking his wife to return home and promising to find a job. Luz Maria agreed, on the condition that they could rent their own apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. After completing her education and defending her diploma, Luz Maria landed her dream job at the city prosecutor's office. As a smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began to advance in her career. As time passed, the family's financial situation significantly improved, thanks to Luz Maria's hard work and success. They were eventually able to afford a car. Meanwhile, Jorge continued to struggle with his own life, failing to find direction and instead relying on his wife's income. His laziness and jealousy intensified over time, causing tension in the household. Jorge had a volatile temper, and the situation worsened with time. Jorge was a man who preferred a life of leisure, spending most of his time at home watching TV, drinking beer with friends, and relying on his wife's income. He was extremely possessive and controlling, restricting his wife's freedom and autonomy. He wouldn't allow her to make friends, have lunch with colleagues, or even be alone without him. He constantly monitored her phone activity, checked her call history, and read her messages. He also forbade her from creating social media accounts. When they were alone at home, Jorge's behavior was just as bad. He frequently arguments, blamed his wife for all their problems, and never took responsibility for his actions. When they lived with his parents, Jorge failed to stand up for his wife, instead watching as she was humiliated, insulted, and even physically abused by his relatives. Jorge frequently resorted to physical violence in their relationship. He had a controlling attitude towards his wife, Luz Maria, and wrongly believed she would accept his abusive treatment. Their neighbors frequently heard screams coming from their house and witnessed signs of physical abuse on Luz Maria's face and body. Luz Maria had tried to leave her husband multiple times, taking their daughter and moving in with her parents. However, her husband would always show up, beg for forgiveness on his knees, and promise to change. Despite her parents' warnings to leave him, Luz Maria would forgive her husband and give him another chance. On December 15, 2020, after another violent argument, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter, Alice, fled to her mother's house in tears. The next day, Jorge arrived, but it was unclear whether he was seeking reconciliation with his wife or just wanted his car back. He claimed to have found a new job and promised that their lives would improve, swearing that he would never physically harm Luz Maria again. Luz Maria believed him once more and returned to their rented apartment with her husband. In January 2021, Jorge failed to get a job as promised and stole the money Luz Maria had earned, leaving their family with nothing. Luz Maria called her mother to complain, and her mother agreed to meet with her to give her some money until she received her next salary. However, on January 19th, Luz Maria failed to show up and was unreachable by phone, which was unusual for her. Concerned for her daughter's well-being, Morales went to Luz Maria's workplace the next day and found that she had not shown up for 2 consecutive days and had not been in contact with anyone. Around the same time, Jorge was also looking for Luz Maria. He went to the prosecutor's office claiming they had a fight and assuming she had gone to her mother's house. However, Morales suspected that he was lying and immediately went to the police to report Luz Maria missing. That same day, a nationwide alert system was launched under the codename Isabel Claudina. This system was originally designed to facilitate urgent searches for missing young women. When the massive search began, her husband, Jorge, was immediately identified as the lead suspect. In fact, he was the only suspect. Luz Maria had no enemies, and there was no reason to believe she had been kidnapped. The last person to see her alive was Jorge himself. Jorge denied any involvement in Luz Maria's disappearance, claiming he had been searching for her and was outraged to be considered a suspect. Jorge's story had several holes in it, and he couldn't give a clear reason for not telling the police about his wife's disappearance on the same day it happened. If Jorge thought Luz Maria was at her mother's house, it wasn't clear why he didn't call or visit her there. On January 22nd, municipal workers stumbled upon the body of Luz Maria Lopez while responding to a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they found the large plastic bag containing charred human remains. The workers immediately reported the discovery to the police, suspected that the body might be that of Luz Maria. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to she, and Luz Maria's parents and brother identified the body despite its severe disfigurement from fire. Notably, the body was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where Luz Maria worked. Despite the body's severe burns, pathologists determined that Luz Maria had been severely beaten and died from asphyxia. Evidence of internal hemorrhages, fractures sustained while she was still alive, and caked blood in her nose and mouth supported this conclusion. Deep marks on her neck also indicated strangulation. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged. Luz Maria's parents were convinced that their son-in-law, Jorge, was responsible for the brutal murder of their daughter. As a result, Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and investigators began to look into the motive behind the crime. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior were consulted to examine the relationships within the family and the marriage. During the investigation, Luz Maria's mother, Morales, provided an audio recording that had been sent to her anonymously by a neighbor who had witnessed their frequent arguments. The recording captured a heated argument between they, in which Luz Maria frantically screams and cries for help, accompanied by the faint sounds of a child crying in the background. Morales was deeply shocked and extremely upset by the news. She emphasized that if the witness had immediately contacted the police, her daughter might still be alive. The witness did not call the police or even visit the house where the screams originated. The police were unable to locate the anonymous person, which meant they could not be officially involved in the investigation. During an interview, Morales urged citizens to be vigilant and report instances of domestic violence to the police rather than simply documenting them. She believed that such actions could help save lives. The crime sparked widespread outrage, prompting thousands of people to take to the streets and demand justice for Luz Maria. Jorge was taken into custody, but he continued to deny his involvement, claiming he had driven his wife to work on the day she disappeared. Security footage did show their car heading in the direction of her workplace. But the tinted windows made it impossible to determine how many people were inside. Additionally, no footage showed the car stopping or Luz Maria getting out. At the house they was renting, police discovered evidence of a violent incident. There were faint blood stains and drag marks, suggesting that this was where the brutal attack had occurred. Further evidence was discovered in the trunk of the family car, where microscopic fragments of burnt human flesh were found. The investigators also became interested in a recent purchase made by a double orthopedic mattress. Specifically, they were interested in the dense polyethylene wrapping that came with the mattress. A comparative analysis revealed that Jorge had used this wrapping to package the burnt remains of Luz Maria. Additionally, several neighbors came forward as witnesses, reporting that they had frequently heard Jorge yelling at his wife and threatening to kill her. Just days before Luz Maria's disappearance, Jorge had been overheard shouting that he would kill her if she tried to leave him, and that he would hide her body so well that no one would ever find it. Criminologists used collected data and witness testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding the crime. On the night of January 19, 2021, a brutal murder took place. The day before, Luz Maria and her husband, Jorge, had a violent argument. Jorge physically assaulted her. On this occasion, his rage escalated, causing him to strike his wife multiple times. Her screams for help were heard by the neighbors, but they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The beating left Luz Maria with a broken nose and a head injury. Jorge then strangled her with his bare hands. In an attempt to dispose of the body, he dragged it to the backyard, doused it with flammable liquid, and set it on fire. However, the fire produced a significant amount of smoke and a strong odor, which Jorge feared would attract the attention of the neighbors. He quickly extinguished the flames, wrapped the charred remains in plastic, and sought a secluded location to hide the body. He believing it would never be discovered. Jorge committed a heinous crime in front of his 3.5-year-old daughter, who was old enough to partially understand what was happening. The child witnessed the beating and crime, and her cries and screams were recorded. Despite this, Jorge attempted to cover his tracks by using his knowledge of forensics, gained from his wife's textbooks, to create an alibi. He disposed of her body in a drainage sewer on a poorly lit road with no surveillance cameras. The next morning, Jorge drove to his wife's workplace, pretending to have taken her there as usual. He then began a fake search for her, contacting her colleagues, friends, and family. During the trial, Jorge's lawyers delayed proceedings and attempted to mislead the investigation. They claimed that all the evidence and witness statements were indirect and did not directly prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys requested that Jorge's detention be changed to house arrest, arguing that he was deeply depressed due to the accusations of killing Luz Maria he loved and the mother of his child. However, the crucial evidence came from Luz Maria's phone, which was in Jorge's possession. On the day after the crime, he sent multiple messages from her phone to different people, attempting to make people believe that Luz Maria was still alive. An analysis of the phone's movements revealed that it was consistently in the same locations as Jorge's phone. The defense team attempted to spin this evidence in their favor, claiming that Jorge had found his wife's phone and was driving around the city with it while searching for her. However, they failed to explain why Jorge was sending messages from her phone. Furthermore, bruises and scratches on Jorge's body, which were documented by experts through photographs, suggested that Luz Maria had put up a struggle. The most noticeable injury on Jorge was a scratch on his neck. However, investigators were unable to find Jorge's skin cells under Luz Maria's fingernails. Despite several questionable points in the case, the prosecutor pushed for the maximum possible sentence. The defendant was found guilty of brutally murdering his wife in October 2022. Jorge was sentenced to 50 years in prison, despite maintaining his innocence. Custody of their young daughter, Alice, was awarded to her maternal grandparents. The grandparents expressed that their granddaughter had given their lives new meaning. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan, born in 1987 in Nanjing, China, a major city and former capital, Wang Nan grew up in a relatively affluent family. Her parents provided her with the best possible education and encouraged her to develop her talents. After completing her secondary education, Wang Nan enrolled in a prestigious university, where she studied business and finance, and also learned several foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she quickly proved herself to be a valuable, responsible, and motivated employee. Her career advanced rapidly, and she was soon sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Wang Nan worked as a top manager for several years before deciding to leave the agency to start her own business. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which she managed successfully, and it eventually grew into a small but popular chain. Wang Nan was a thriving young entrepreneur who had devoted her life to her career. With her constant business engagements, she barely had time for socializing or dating, and her loneliness became a normal part of her life. At almost 30 years old, Wang Nan was well established in Thailand, having lived there for a while and become proficient in the language. However, she strived for further improvement, taking additional courses to learn Thai at a training center. There, she met a young man named Yu Xiaodong, who initially stared at her before introducing himself in his native language. They exchanged brief conversations, and he inquired about her reason for studying the language. Wang Nan replied that it was for business purposes, and Yu Xiaodong proposed exchanging business cards to potentially meet up someday. Although Wang Nan was not interested in continuing the conversation, she still politely gave him her business card. Yu Xiaodong also gave Wang Nan his own business card, which said that he worked in the import-export industry in Bangkok. Not very impressed, Wang Nan put the business card in her wallet and forgot about it. Yu Xiaodong was the only one who showed genuine interest in Wang Nan, and he wasted no time in calling her the very next day. However, she was preoccupied with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes to talk, so she declined his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, Yu Xiaodong asked her out again, but Wang Nan turned him down once more, citing her busy schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference where she hoped to expand her professional network. Undeterred, Yu Xiaodong showed up at the conference with a stunning bouquet of flowers and waited for Wang Nan to become available. When she was free, he approached her and asked her out once more. This time, Wang Nan was charmed by his persistence, which was a new experience for her. No one had ever pursued her so relentlessly before, so she agreed to meet him for dinner. As it turned out, Yu Xiaodong's interest in Wang Nan was more than just a passing infatuation. He was completely smitten. He showered her with attention, surprise gifts, and romantic gestures, including sending flowers to her doorstep every morning with sweet notes attached. He also called her at least twice a day to wish her good morning and good night. Wang Nan had mixed emotions about the situation. While she was irritated by Yu Xiaodong's all-consuming infatuation, she was also flattered that someone was making such an effort to win her heart. As a result, she found herself unexpectedly entering into a romantic relationship. Yu Xiaodong went out of his way to woo her, not only romantically but also by trying to be perfect in every aspect of their relationship. He shared her interests and opinions, learned to cook her favorite meals, and planned exciting activities for them to enjoy together. He was also eager to help her with her work and household chores at a moment's notice. Wang Nan was over the moon with happiness, feeling as though she was living in a fairy tale. Yu Xiaodong's behavior, however, was moving at a breakneck pace. Despite having only been together for a few months, he was already making plans for their wedding and discussing potential names for their future children. This made Wang Nan uncomfortable, but Yu Xiaodong would counter by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and that it was time for them to start thinking about building a family. That night, Yu Xiaodong wrote a heartfelt letter to Wang Nan, expressing his deep affection and commitment to being a good husband and father. The next morning, he arrived at her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, reiterating his seriousness about marrying her. Wang Nan jokingly mentioned that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half, but Yu Xiaodong suggested they go there immediately. To her surprise, the courthouse was open, and the officer responsible for registering marriages was already at his desk, ready to formalize their union. Yu Xiaodong had secretly arranged for a hasty marriage ceremony to take place early in the morning. The whole event was unusual and lacking in formality. There were no guests, no exchange of rings, no wedding dress or veil, and no commemorative photographs. Wang Nan couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing wasn't really happening, especially since she hadn't even introduced her new husband to her mother, with whom she was extremely close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate in her hand, and her newlywed husband was standing beside her, beaming with satisfaction. Wang Nan's marriage was troubled from the start. She had second thoughts about marrying Yu Xiaodong almost immediately after the wedding. Initially, she had hoped he would be a reliable partner, a man she could depend on. Unfortunately, her expectations were not met, and her new husband's true nature soon revealed itself. Yu Xiaodong spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money without contributing to their household expenses. Whenever his wife asked him why he wasn't working, he claimed his business was slow due to seasonal fluctuations and that he was just taking a break. However, her suspicions grew as time passed, and she decided to investigate his business. Her findings shocked her. His supposedly successful import-export company existed only on paper and business cards. Wang Nan was horrified, realizing too late that she should have had a prenuptial agreement. Now, her husband could freely spend her earnings, and if they divorced, he would claim her assets. During a tense conversation, Yu Xiaodong broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find a good job. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for work and was content to rely on his wife's support. Yu Xiaodong, a grown man, consistently acted like a child. He spent most of his time playing computer games and expected his wife, Wang Nan, to pay for his personal expenses whenever he helped out around the house or assisted her at the restaurant. Wang Nan eventually had enough and told him she would no longer give him money unless he got a job. The next day, Yu Xiaodong disappeared, taking their marriage certificate and Wang Nan's identity card with him. Wang Nan only discovered the missing documents that evening when her accountant called to inquire about a large transfer of funds from her account. She was shocked, as she had not authorized the transfer. However, she immediately suspected her husband's involvement. It turned out that Yu Xiaodong had transferred more than $500,000 into his own account, using the stolen documents to deceive the bank into thinking it was their joint decision to transfer their shared money. Wang Nan quickly reported the theft to the police, who tracked down Yu Xiaodong a few hours later as he attempted to withdraw some of the stolen money. Confronted by the police and his wife, Xiaodong broke down and begged for forgiveness on his knees. He confessed to losing a large sum of money through gambling, which had led to threats of death and demands to repay the debt. This was not his first brush with the law, as he had previously served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in his home country of China. One man was consumed by shame as she learned the truth about her husband's past. Despite this, she believed that his addiction to gambling was a disease that could be overcome, and she wanted to help him recover and return to a normal life. To support him, Wang Nan agreed to pay off half of his debt and offered him a job as heater of one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu Xiaodong appeared to be grateful for the opportunity and took his new role seriously. He even developed a promising strategy for the restaurant's growth. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived. Before long, he began to spend more time playing computer games and indulging in other leisure activities. Meanwhile, Wang Nan discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with her husband. Yu Xiaodong initially expressed reservations about the pregnancy, and in a moment of hesitation, asked his wife to consider an abortion, which she flatly refused. The disagreement escalated to the point where he threatened divorce and division of their property, but eventually, his demeanor softened, and he apologized for his rash words. Yu Xiaodong later admitted that his outburst was driven by emotional anxiety, but ultimately, he was happy about the impending arrival of their child. However, things took a dramatic turn 2 months later. During a fateful trip, Yu Xiaodong suggested that his wife purchase life insurance, citing the pregnancy as a reason to safeguard her well-being and that of their unborn child in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. This seemingly caring gesture came after a period of harmony in their marriage, where he had been attentive, supportive, and diligent in his role as a husband and expectant father. Wang Nan quickly agreed to her husband's suggestion and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. They purchased insurance the very next day. A couple of weeks later, Yu Xiaodong proposed a vacation to help them relax and unwind. Wang Nan was initially hesitant, but her husband was insistent. He pointed out that they had never had a honeymoon and that traveling with a baby would be difficult in the coming years. He also felt that they needed a break to clear their minds of the stress and negativity they had been experiencing. Wang Nan was eventually won over by her husband's arguments and agreed to the trip. He took charge of planning the entire vacation, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities that would be enjoyable and educational, yet not too strenuous for Wang Nan's pregnant state. Wang Nan was happy to leave the planning to her husband and was pleased to see how much effort he was putting into making their vacation special. On June 7th, they visited the park for the first time and spent most of the day exploring its many beautiful sights and lookouts. However, as the summer evening wore on, the park became increasingly crowded, with tourists everywhere. As the sun began to set, Wang Nan noticed that her husband, Yu Xiaodong, was growing angry and nervous. When she asked him what was wrong, he explained that the crowds were ruining their chance to enjoy a romantic sunset in peace. Despite his initial frustration, Yu Xiaodong tried to make the most of the situation, suggesting that they could still have a romantic moment as the sun set. As the park began to clear out, he climbed the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, Wang Nan, to join him, promising her an incredible view. However, Wang declined, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu Xiaodong became angry but eventually returned to his wife, suggesting that they should come back to the park another time to watch the sunrise together. The Wang Nan and Yu Xiaodong returned to their hotel late on Saturday night, so they decided to sleep in and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. As planned, they woke up at 3 a.m. on June 9th and left for the national park while it was still dark outside. Their goal was to catch the first rays of the rising sun. When they arrived, they found the park nearly empty, with hardly any other visitors. They watched the sunrise together on an observation deck. Then, Yu Xiaodong encouraged his wife, Wang Nan, to join him at the cliff's edge to see some ancient rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Wang Nan trusted her husband's assurance that he would help her climb down and back up safely. As they took in the breathtaking view, Yu Xiaodong suddenly asked Wang Nan if she regretted anything in life. She replied that she did not. However, in a shocking turn of events, Yu Xiaodong's demeanor changed. He touched his wife's hair, kissed her cheek, whispered "die" in her ear, and then pushed her off the cliff. To avoid detection, he checked their surroundings to make sure no one had witnessed the incident. Looking down, he couldn't see where Wang Nan had fallen, and the silence indicated that there were no witnesses below. Yu Xiaodong calmly walked towards the park exit, planning to report the incident after his wife was surely dead. However, hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang Nan's body on the rocks and immediately called for rescue, reporting the incident. As Yu Xiaodong was leaving the reserve, several emergency vehicles sped past him, sirens blaring. Realizing what was happening, he quickly returned to the scene, pretending to be distressed. There, he put on a convincing performance, crying and begging for help. Convinced that his wife was dead and no one would discover the truth, he remained unaware that Wang Nan's fall had been broken by tree branches, which reduced her speed before she landed on bushes and then rolled onto the rocks. This series of events cushioned the impact, saving her life and that of their child, although she suffered severe injuries. Yu Xiaodong was overcome with grief, crying and lamenting the loss of his wife and child. However, his wife suddenly regained consciousness and attempted to speak, but was unable to. The people around her noticed the genuine horror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but he quickly composed himself and leaned in close to his wife. In a hushed tone, he warned her in Chinese to remain silent if she wanted to survive. Wang Nan's injuries were severe, including head trauma, multiple fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. Her spine was also severely damaged, leaving doctors concerned that even if she survived, she would likely be paralyzed and never walk again. Wang Nan spent several days in a coma, connected to life support machines, during which time her husband remained by her side constantly. However, despite his devoted appearance, Yu Xiaodong's intentions were sinister. Every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to complete the job without arousing suspicion. His actions were a ruse, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of love and devotion that he examined the devices, but couldn't find a way to quietly disable them. Wang Nan slowly regained consciousness. When she did, her husband was beside himself with fear. He stayed with her constantly, terrified that she would reveal the truth to the police at any moment. When they were alone, he threatened her again, saying he had nothing to lose. During the initial police interrogation, the Wang Nan supported her husband's claim that her fall was caused by dizziness. However, when her husband briefly left the room, Wang Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and prevent her husband from re-entering. It was then that she recounted the disturbing story of her fall, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room, shouting that his wife was delusional due to her head injury and that he would never harm her or their baby. His explanation was not believable, and he was arrested on the same day. At the hospital, he was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and intimidation after her husband was taken into custody and sent to jail to await trial. Wang Nan finally felt a sense of relief. Although she still had a long and difficult recovery ahead of her, she now felt safe. Wang Nan initially held on to hope that her pregnancy could be saved, despite the severe fall. However, her medical team advised her to terminate the pregnancy due to the large amounts of painkillers and antibiotics she was receiving, as well as the multiple surgeries she underwent under general anesthesia. The doctors prioritized Wang Nan's life, warning her that the fetus was unlikely to survive the strong medications. This news came as a devastating shock to Wang Nan, but she ultimately followed the doctor's advice. During the trial, Yu Xiaodong vehemently denied any wrongdoing, sticking to his claim that the incident was an accident. He remained calm and composed in prison, hiring skilled lawyers and expressing confidence that he would either be acquitted or receive a lenient sentence. In contrast, the investigators and prosecutor were convinced that Yu Xiaodong had deliberately committed the crime. Motivated by the prospect of collecting a substantial insurance payout and inheriting his wife's fortune, which was valued at nearly $2.5 million at the time. During an interrogation, Yu Xiaodong made a shocking revelation about his motive for the heinous crime. He disclosed that he was angry with his wife for not paying off his entire debt, which had accumulated due to his gambling habit. In his mind, if his wife truly loved him, she would have cleared all his debts since she had the financial means to do so. This perceived betrayal led Yu Xiaodong to believe that his wife did not love him, and therefore, he felt justified in punishing her. After making this astonishing confession, the defendant became silent, seemingly aware that he had revealed too much. He attempted to retract his statement, claiming that he had been misunderstood. Nevertheless, his unexpected admission, combined with Wang Nan's testimony, was sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence. In March 2021, Yu Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed unusual leniency by reducing the life sentence to 10 years in prison. Wang Nan and her family were shocked and outraged by the lenient sentence given to Yu Xiaodong, believing it would set a bad precedent and encourage others to commit similar heinous crimes. Yu Xiaodong received a sentence of 10 years for attempting to murder his pregnant Wang Nan. As of now, Yu Xiaodong is serving her 10-year sentence while Wang Nan is challenging the court's decision. Meanwhile, Yu Xiaodong is filing appeals to prove her innocence. Wang Nan has successfully restarted her business in 2023 and also established an organization that provides support to women who have been affected by domestic violence. She writes about her personal experiences and warnings for women on her blog. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the doors slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. but no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession, claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper, and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visitor to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation. Informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried her. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Sarah Foxwell. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998, in Salisbury, Maryland, into a large family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother had 3 additional children from a previous marriage. After her parents divorced, Sarah's mother struggled to care for her children alone. She worked long hours, so the children often stayed with relatives. As the middle child, Sarah played a peacemaking role, usually managing to bring her siblings together despite their frequent arguments. In December 2009, 11-year-old Sarah temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents, who lived in a spacious farmhouse on the outskirts of Salisbury. The kids loved visiting their aunt's home, which offered plenty of room to play. On December 22, 2009, the whole family was filled with joy and excitement, eagerly awaiting the upcoming Christmas day. After a pizza dinner, they began getting ready for bed around 9 p.m. Sarah shared a room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, at the end of the hallway near the back door. The sisters chatted for a bit before falling asleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather went to wake the kids, but only found Emma in the room. He searched the entire house, thinking Sarah might have already gotten up, but couldn't find her anywhere. He informed Sarah's aunt, and together they thoroughly searched every room and corner of the house. When they couldn't find Sarah, her aunt suggested she might have gone outside to play in the snow, but her shoes and jacket were still at home. Then, her aunt noticed that Sarah's toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. After searching the surrounding area and finding no Sarah, her aunt called Sarah's mother, who rushed over. They then contacted the police, who arrived quickly and began searching the house. Sarah's aunt explained that she always checked the doors and windows every night before bed, including the previous evening, and the police couldn't find any signs of Sarah inside or nearby. When they learned about the missing toothbrush, the officers considered the possibility of an abduction, thinking the kidnapper might have taken the toothbrush before leaving with Sarah. They then decided to verify if all the doors and windows were indeed locked as Sarah's aunt had claimed. As investigators approached the back door next to Sarah's room, they found it unlocked, despite her aunt's insistence that it had been locked the night before. This discovery raised suspicions, since the family kept a spare key outside, which was now missing. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key shows that he was very familiar with this family. Furthermore, the family's dog, which normally barked at strangers, had remained silent that night. The police launched a massive search operation, fearing that Sarah might have been kidnapped. News of her disappearance spread quickly, prompting many local residents to contact the police and offer their assistance. The police chief has made a public appeal through the media, asking people to check their cameras for any suspicious activity. Dozens of local police officers joined the search, with assistance from neighboring town police departments and police from other states. The police were hopeful that they would find Sarah alive, as the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, which could indicate that they intended to keep her alive. With this in mind, the police dedicated all their resources to the search. Outside the house, investigators found their first clue, fresh tire tracks in the snow, suggesting the kidnapper had arrived by car. Since Sarah's warm clothing was still at home, it was unlikely the kidnapper had taken her on foot. Meanwhile, at the police station, Sarah's family was in for a surprise. Her 6-year-old sister, Emma, who shared a room with Sarah, whispered to their grandmother that she had seen the person who took Sarah. Emma claimed she had woken up to a man talking to Sarah, but pretended to be asleep, unsure of what was happening. She then saw the man leave the room with Sarah. What Emma said next sent shockwaves through the family. She knew the man who took Sarah. It was Mr. Thomas, the ex-boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. A man named Thomas had a history of violence against women and girls. Despite his criminal record, he spent a lot of time at Aunt Sarah's house and the children got to know him. The police knew Thomas well because he had many criminal records. Thomas first went to prison at 18 for attacking a 12-year-old girl, but he was released early after just a few months. He was sentenced again for assaulting another minor, but he was released early once more, this time after serving 6 months due to good behavior. Thomas continued to exhibit violent behavior, including another assault for which he received a 6-month sentence. He also tried to assault a girl on the same day his wife returned home from the hospital with their newborn baby. His wife eventually divorced him and obtained a restraining order after he threatened to kill her and their daughter. In another disturbing incident, Thomas targeted 2 young girls sitting on a porch. He approached them, claiming he had been watching one of them play in the yard, and called her a wild girl. He then used a stick to hit her on the buttocks, prompting her to run inside and tell her mother about the attack. She recognized Thomas from the window and recalled seeing his face before she moved into the house. She had previously checked the local sex offender registry and found his photo listed. She immediately reported him to the police, and the case proceeded to court. However, Thomas avoided punishment for his actions. Before the trial, she was threatened not to mention that Thomas was a sex offender and had a previous conviction for sexual assault. A few months prior to Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested again for breaking into a 24-year-old woman's bedroom at night, undressing, and masturbating beside her bed. He was released on bail after his arrest. Initially, Thomas hid his criminal past from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually discovered the truth. Despite this, Thomas managed to persuade her that the accusations against him were false and that he was innocent. Detectives are certain that Thomas was the person who kidnapped Sarah. This suspicion was reinforced by the fact that during his relationship with Sarah's aunt, he had spent an inordinate amount of time with Sarah, more so than with the other children in the household. At the time, this behavior didn't seem unusual, but now that Sarah is missing, it appears highly suspicious. To further investigate, the police visited Thomas's residence, a shed located on his parents' property just a few miles away. They brought him in for questioning and obtained a search warrant for the shed. Upon searching, they found it to be in disarray with poor living conditions, but no evidence linking Thomas to Sarah's disappearance was discovered. However, the police did find a large collection of adult magazines and DVDs, which filled the shed. During the interrogation, Thomas denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was struggling with his own personal issues, specifically his tendency to commit crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, he had made a conscious effort to avoid being alone with the children while dating Sarah's aunt, in order to avoid any false accusations. When confronted with Emma's testimony, which placed him at the scene of the abduction, Thomas dismissed her account, stating that she had a history of fabricating stories and that he was not there on the night in question. Detectives were skeptical of Thomas's story. It wasn't just because of his prior convictions. As they questioned him about 11-year-old Sarah's disappearance, Thomas seemed to take pleasure in the situation, smiling and mocking the sheriff. Although it is certain that he planned the crime without any mistakes, the police still work hard to solve the case and find out the truth about what really happened. Thomas claimed to have a solid alibi, stating he was at a bar with a friend until late at night. However, investigators found a discrepancy in his story. Although he was indeed at the bar, he left around 1 a.m. and wasn't seen again until 7 a.m. the next morning. A review of his phone records revealed that he had sent messages to several women, proposing to meet up, but all of them declined. Despite the inconsistencies in Thomas's story, detectives still couldn't gather enough evidence to incriminate him. Their primary concern was finding Sarah, and they poured all their resources into the search. A search of Thomas's pickup truck yielded several crucial clues. Inside, they found Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop, which suggested that Thomas might have used the candy to lure her into his vehicle. Furthermore, the tire tracks on his truck matched the ones found in the snow outside the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Thomas had lied about not visiting Aunt Sarah's house for more than a month. This did not deter the police and volunteers from continuing their search for Sarah. They searched extensively, covering many miles around her house, checking abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. K-9 units and helicopters assisted in the search. The community provided immense support to the police efforts, with hundreds signing up to volunteer. The poor weather and upcoming holidays did not dampen the search, but unfortunately, the efforts yielded no results. The search party resumed early the next morning, with their numbers increasing rather than dwindling. Eventually, the number of volunteers swelled to 3,000 people. Due to the sheer volume of volunteers, the coordination center had to be relocated from the police station to a larger venue, the local baseball stadium. Many of the volunteers brought their children to assist, handing out essentials such as water, hot tea, and food. Despite the odds, the search continued with renewed determination to find Sarah alive. While investigators were questioning Thomas, they received another crucial piece of evidence. After he was brought to the station, his clothes were sent to the lab for analysis. Experts discovered foreign DNA on Thomas's underwear, which they compared to a DNA sample from Sarah's belongings. The results showed a complete match, leading detectives to a disturbing conclusion. It appeared that Thomas had sexually assaulted Sarah after abducting her. Despite the lack of progress in the search, thousands of people gathered on Christmas Day, December 25th, to continue looking for Sarah. Meanwhile, investigators obtained GPS data from Thomas's phone, which showed the cell towers his phone had connected to, although the exact locations were not provided. Police discovered that on the night Sarah vanished, her phone had connected to 3 cell towers, allowing them to narrow down the search area to a roughly triangular zone. Investigators focused on this location, located near the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's home. The area was densely wooded, but hundreds of people thoroughly searched every inch of the territory, holding out hope for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Sadly, the outcome was far more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police discovered Sarah's body on the ground, near the state border. She was lying on her back with her arms raised upwards, pointing towards the sky. Medical experts performed an autopsy and were shocked by what they discovered. They confirmed that Sarah had been sexually assaulted and showed signs of strangulation. Additionally, experts found dirt in Sarah's lungs, suggesting that the perpetrator had attempted to drown her in a puddle. During this torture, Sarah lost consciousness. The experts also found evidence that Sarah had suffered severe burns. It is believed that the perpetrator may have left her lying in the forest for some time, went to get gasoline, and then returned to set Sarah on fire. Significantly, traces of smoke were found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive when the fire was set. This also explains why her hands were raised and pointing to the sky. Likely a reflex reaction to the fire. The sheer cruelty of these actions shocked and horrified everyone involved in the case, including the detectives. After reconstructing the case, the investigators' main goal is to ensure that the perpetrator, Thomas, receives the death penalty. Thomas continued to deny any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, but the evidence against him was substantial. After discovering Sarah's body, forensic experts found several strands of hair and pieces of fabric from Sarah's pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further linking him to her kidnapping. Based on all the evidence, it is very unlikely that Thomas will escape punishment. The trial was delayed for over a year, but it never took place. In early 2011, the prosecution offered Thomas a plea deal. Under the terms of the agreement, Thomas would plead guilty and receive a life sentence, rather than facing the death penalty. While this deal may seem lenient considering Thomas's crimes, there were valid reasons for accepting it. A key consideration was that Sarah's younger sister would have to testify multiple times in court, facing the man who had murdered her sister. Sarah's kidnapping and murder were devastating for her family, and there was a risk that the trial's outcome might not bring them the justice they sought. Due to uncertainty about securing the death penalty, the prosecution presented a plea deal. This deal meant that Thomas would not receive the death penalty, and in return, he would plead guilty to the crime. The terms of the deal also ensured that Thomas would not be eligible for early release from prison. Another issue was that the state governor at the time opposed the death penalty. Ultimately, Thomas agreed to the deal and confessed to the detectives, revealing details they already knew. He admitted to tricking Sarah into leaving her house with him, then taking her away, sexually assaulting her, and killing her. As a result, Thomas received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. During his initial days in prison, Thomas was assaulted by a fellow inmate with a homemade weapon during lunch, resulting in several severe lacerations. Despite the attack, Thomas survived and was later given increased protection by prison staff. The public was outraged by Sarah's case, which exposed repeated failures in Thomas's custody, allowing him to be released but continue to commit crimes. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, an older brother, and a younger sister. Her father worked in construction and often traveled to other states for work, so her mother mainly took care of her and her siblings. Throughout her childhood, Jessica was a cheerful and active girl who loved playing outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9 years old, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. While her mother packed for the trip, her father went to the store to buy some vacation items. Jessica asked her mother if she could go to the yard to wait for her father to return. Her mother agreed but told her to stay in the yard and not wander off. The family's apartment complex was located in a quiet area, surrounded by many trees and away from the main road. The neighborhood was considered safe, and children often played outside without regular adult supervision. However, when Jessica's father returned home around 6 p.m., he asked his wife where Jessica was, and she was surprised to learn that Jessica was not in the yard as she had thought. The parents searched the yard but couldn't find their daughter Jessica. Growing increasingly worried, they started asking neighbors if they had seen Jessica. A neighbor reported seeing Jessica sitting on a bench, reading a book, but this information yielded no results. As night began to fall and Jessica was still missing, her parents contacted the police. The police quickly began search operations, questioning neighbors and canvassing the surrounding area. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find Jessica, forcing the police to expand their search to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was distorted by background noise. But the police determined that Jessica might have been near a water pumping station several miles from her home. When the police arrived at the water pumping station, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Jessica's body was discovered near the pumping station, hidden in a black trash bag. This location was only a few meters from the road, but the pumping station was located under a bridge, making it nearly impossible to detect. Next to the body were some magazines and a children's mirror. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and handed her body over to the medical examiner for further investigation. Investigators turned their attention to tracing the 911 call, which they believed was made by the killer. Their goal was to use the call to identify the killer. However, the call was made from a public phone at a nearby gas station, and when the police arrived, the perpetrator had already fled. Detectives tried to take fingerprints, but it was a difficult task because this was a public phone booth, which likely had many fingerprints from different users. In addition, it was possible that the killer had wiped the phone clean after calling or had worn gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Further investigation revealed that Jessica may have been killed elsewhere and her body moved to the water pumping station. Evidence on the ground showed that the killer pulled the body out of the car, then put it in a trash bag and dragged it to the water pumping station. Jessica's clothes were still intact, except for a missing shoe, which was not found at the scene. The only potential clue at the crime scene was tire tracks on the ground. There was a possibility that they belonged to the killer's car, so the police took photos and analyzed the prints. Meanwhile, a medical examination of the body showed that the victim died from strangulation, with marks on the face and neck indicating the killer used bare hands. An autopsy showed that Jessica had eaten a hamburger shortly before her death. Her mother said she did not give Jessica a hamburger that day, suggesting the killer may have provided her with food. Additionally, forensic experts found no evidence of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unknown. Initially, police had suspected Jessica's parents of being involved in her disappearance because they had not had a solid alibi. Jessica's mother had claimed that she had packed up the apartment, and her father had claimed that he had been out shopping, so they clearly had had the opportunity to commit the crime. The police had been confused as to how the killer had been able to get Jessica out of the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming, leading them to believe that the killer might have been someone Jessica knew and trusted, and she might have voluntarily left with them. The killer's voice on the 911 call had provided another clue. In the recording, experts had detected feelings of grief and remorse, suggesting that the killer had truly felt remorse for his actions. The fact that the killer had taken the risk of calling 911 suggested that they might have been trying to minimize guilt or manipulate the investigation. However, the obvious sadness in the killer's voice had led investigators to believe that the killer had likely been remorseful for his actions. The investigation had reached a turning point when police had found a roll of black garbage bags in the trunk of Jessica's father's car, similar to the bag used to dispose of the victim's body. However, expert examination had shown that the bags had come from another manufacturer, eliminating Jessica's father as a suspect. The focus of the investigation had then turned to other suspects. Forensic experts had conducted a thorough examination of the victim's clothes and body, thereby obtaining many clues. One notable discovery had been that there had been a significant amount of dog hair on Jessica's clothes, even though her family had not owned dogs. This suggested that the dog hair might have come from the perpetrator's dog. Additionally, human hair of an unidentified man had been found on Jessica's body, and experts had been working to extract the DNA profile from the sample. However, this process had taken several days. Further examination had revealed two strange fibers on Jessica's clothes that experts had analyzed and determined likely had originated from car seat covers and carpets. This finding had supported the theory that Jessica had been killed at a location other than the water pumping station and then transported there by car. To determine the breed of dog that had shed hair on Jessica's clothes, experts had used the FBI's specialized database, which contained microscopic photos of hair from many different dog breeds. By comparing fur samples with a database, experts had determined that the fur had belonged to a Shar-Pei. This discovery had suggested that the perpetrator might have owned a Shar-Pei and that the dog's fur had been transferred to Jessica's clothes at the perpetrator's home or in the car. According to investigators' initial theory, the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to buy hamburgers at McDonald's, and then taken her to his home, where she had been murdered. To aid the investigation, experts had tried to improve the quality of the phone call recordings, but this had proved difficult. They had decided to try a different approach and sought help from NASA, which had advanced audio enhancement tools originally designed for use in space recordings. NASA had agreed to assist and provide police with higher quality audio. However, experts still needed to sample the suspect's voice to compare with the call recording. Detectives had suspected that the killer might have known Jessica, so they had played the call recording for her mother, hoping she could recognize the voice. At first, she had said the voice was familiar but couldn't place it. When she had heard it a second time, she suddenly had realized that the voice belonged to a neighbor who had lived in their complex. Although she couldn't remember his name, she had told detectives that he often had taken his Shar-Pei for walks in the yard. Police had quickly identified this man as James Crow, 35 years old. Hours after Jessica had disappeared, investigators had questioned her neighbors, including James Crow. James had told them that he had seen Jessica in her yard while walking his dog, Pumpkin, a Shar-Pei. They had exchanged a few words and then he had left. Detectives had looked into his past and had found no history of criminal activity. He used to be a truck driver, but had been currently unemployed and had spent most of his time walking around the neighborhood with his dog. Detectives realized that the similarity in voice and breed of dog had not been enough to arrest James, so they obtained a search warrant for James' car. Inside, they found two disturbing clues. Under the front passenger seat, they discovered an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious because James had no children and Jessica had had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach. Additionally, the car had brand new tires that had barely been used, which James had claimed to have changed on the day Jessica was murdered. However, his previous tire had not been very old and could have lasted a few more years. Police investigated further and discovered that one of James' old tires had been left behind at an auto service. When they compared the tire tread pattern to prints found near Jessica's body, they did not match. However, it was possible that tire marks on the ground did not belong to the killer's car but to another vehicle. Police also searched James' apartment, where they found a box containing several rolls of trash bags similar in size and color to the one found on Jessica's body. To determine if there was any connection between the bags, detectives needed to find a way to prove that they had come from the same manufacturer. At first, this seemed impossible, as the bags had no distinctive markings or features and there were hundreds of manufacturers of similar products. The detectives had an idea to solve this problem. They contacted Roberts, a quality control specialist for the company that had manufactured the bags found in James' apartment. Roberts pinpointed the factory that had produced the bags based on a special code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. The code indicated that the product had come from a facility in Virginia. Roberts explained that a small amount of iron or titanium was added to the bag's composition, depending on its color. Because the factory produced bags in many different colors, the materials used in production changed constantly, causing the ratio of plastic and iron or titanium to change daily. To take advantage of this information, experts used high-intensity X-rays to measure the presence of iron and titanium in the plastic of handbags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene. This analysis provided exact ratios of elements, which were identical in both bags. This suggested the bags had been made on the same day and possibly from the same batch. However, there was more to the story than that. During the production of garbage bags, microscopic debris accumulated on the machine and imprinted on the plastic sheets as they were rolled out. This created a unique stripe pattern on each bag, visible to the naked eye. Even though the debris on the conveyor belt was constantly changing, creating a new pattern every few hundred feet of fabric, the results were consistent enough to provide another possible lead in the investigation. The similarity of the bags suggested that not only had they been produced in the same batch, but they had also been produced within a short time frame, perhaps just a few hours apart. Comparison of the bags from the suspect's apartment and the crime scene revealed a striking match in the lines and patterns on the bags. On further inspection, experts showed that the bags had been rolled into bundles by machine, which could have created irregularities during the rolling process. Although these irregularities were hardly noticeable, they could be detected by examining the edges of the bag, where the folds formed a unique pattern. Upon re-examining the bags, experts discovered that the pattern on the bags at the suspect's apartment matched the pattern at the crime scene. Further analysis also revealed that fibers found on Jessica's clothing had matched the carpet in James' apartment and the upholstery of his car seat. An audio expert had also analyzed the 911 call recording and compared it to James's voice sample, concluding that the voice in the recording belonged to James. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, detectives still believed in James' involvement in the case and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Despite James continuing to deny guilt, the case still went to trial. The prosecution presented its theories, highlighting James' frequent outdoor activities with his dog, which had earned him the trust of local children, including Jessica. According to police, James had met Jessica while walking his dog and had struck up a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's, and she agreed because she knew him. After the meal, James allegedly invited Jessica to his home. While his wife was away, evidence had shown that Jessica was actually at James's house that day, as fibers from his living room carpet were found on her clothes. The investigation revealed that James might have tried to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Forensic evidence indicated that the killer had strangled Jessica with their bare hands and pressed their palms against her face, possibly to silence her if she tried to scream. Panicked, the killer then placed Jessica's body in a trash bag and transported it to their car without arousing suspicion from the neighbors. The killer dumped her body near a water station, called 911 from a nearby gas station, and returned home. During the preliminary hearings, James's attorneys attempted to defend the evidence, arguing that there was no concrete proof of James' guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense pointed out that in murder cases, the standard of proof is higher and more direct. Therefore, the possibility that James could avoid the death penalty was very large. A plea agreement was offered to James based on the circumstances surrounding the case. The deal required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder and accept a sentence of 40 years in prison without parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. 2 years after the murder, in the summer of 1998, James accepted the deal. Although he was not required to provide details about the crime, he said that one of the reasons he accepted the deal was to spare Jessica's family the torment of the trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse for his actions and used the 911 call as evidence. The purpose of the call was unclear, but it suggested James was trying to alleviate his guilt. However, Jessica's parents were not satisfied with this deal because they had hoped for the death penalty and wanted James to confess to the crime. Despite this, James remained silent about the details of his actions. James did not fully serve his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 from health problems, taking with him details of his crimes and motives.